Chapter 319. After an hour of research, speculation, thinking, and analysis, Huaisher finally confirmed that he had become a dog. It seemed to be a husky, but was it a wolf or a dog? Huaisher looked at his reflection in the water and tilted his head in thought. He could not figure out what breed he was at all. Then, he suddenly remembered. A wolf's tail is up and a dog's tail is down. So, He abruptly turned his head and saw his tail slowly rise and then fall quickly. Like an elevator, it rose and fell freely. He even shook it vigorously twice, creating a splash of water to show his presence. What the hell? He moved closer to take a closer look, but the annoying tail moved back a little. He took another step forward, but the tail quickly moved back again. Huaisher was stunned for a moment before he sneered. "Hey, little guy, I can't deal with you." Then he dashed off, madly chasing after his own tail. He circled in place. Waves of water splashed continuously. After a long time, he finally stood in the cold water and realized what he was doing. He was stunned. In the silence, the sharp cries of the hyenas that sounded like they were mocking him came from afar. Huaisher was silent for a long time before he could not help but roar at the sky in grief and indignation. F***CK the cheat. You tricked me again. A canine, who did not know if it was a wolf or a dog, sat in the water and roared sadly at the sky. He wanted to bite that stinky woman to death right now. But after a long time, he finally accepted reality. Becoming a dog was not bad. On the bright side, at least he did not become a rat, right? Just as he was comforting himself, he suddenly heard the sound of grass and trees swaying not far away. A soft, rustling sound came from the bushes and shrubs, and a shrill laughter gradually died down. Pairs of pitch-black eyes peeked out from the bushes and stared mockingly at Huaisher, who was sitting in the water. Hyenas. 7 or 8 hyenas had already surrounded the place at some point in time. They stared at Huaisher with unbearable hunger in their eyes. F***CK don't. Big brother is one of us. Huaisher took a step back and immediately heard the sneering dog barks not far away. Like an illusion, he actually understood the mocking laughter of the leading hyena. Who the hell is one of you, brat? The spotted hyena, who was commanding his subordinates to slowly surround him, stood on a rock and looked down at the dazed husky. Since you've entered the witch's night, do you expect others to pity you? It grinned, revealing a mouth full of broken teeth, and spat out a mouthful of saliva. It could speak. Wait, it seemed to be a participant in the witch's night. In other words, Huaisher heaved a sigh of relief. That means I'm not the only one who's turned into a dog. He was in a good mood. Consider yourself lucky, the hyena leader said coldly. Let me send you off. At that moment, the hyenas screamed like laughter and rushed towards the husky who was frozen in the icy water. The stench of rotting flesh assaulted his senses. Outside the witch's night, hovering outside the reality, above the bubble-like little bubble, there were countless orbiting halos. Countless scholars walked on it in spirit form, holding tools in their hands, carefully analyzing and organizing the data and laws overflowing from the witch's night. They communicated with each other using source substances. It was like the emergency development and protection of an archaeological site. It was in full swing. It's actually the theory of evolution. The pale green spirit looked at the crystal ball in his hand and sighed in astonishment. Darwin scholars are rare now. In the previous era, were there any creators who specialized in this theory? Unbelievable. The theory of evolution was a huge proposition in biology. It was impossible for all biologists to bypass it. However, because it was so huge, even if the scholars wanted to study it in depth, they would feel helpless in the huge scope and countless problems. They could only explore from the details. Just like how there were more than 10,000 scholars in the reality who were engaged in the study of magnetic fields, but those who were truly capable of studying the grand unified theory were less than 1 in 100. Even the creators would not be distracted by such things. This was not a matter of talent, but the big picture and instinct that belonged more to talent. To be able to master countless prerequisites and set up, and to go so far in the field of the theory of evolution, The creator was simply admirable. Old Wong, look, what did I find? Behind a huge phantom lens in front, a scholar's spirit shouted excitedly, "Come and look at the operating principle of this red blood cell. It's written so exquisitely that it's completely different from the format we use now. Everyone come and learn from it." After the shock and astonishment, deep admiration rose in the hearts of all the scholars. Someone sighed. "That's strange. Why have I never heard of such a big shot who created a field?" It's very simple. It's a confidential organization. The golden spirit next to him, who was in charge of assigning tasks, said calmly, "A creator who is so awesome that he can even set up an observation base in the abyss. Apart from the utopia back then, where else could it be?" There was a brief silence. No one spoke. It had to be said that even outside the astronomy conference, the fall of the utopia back then had brought about a huge shadow, so much so that these past events had become a taboo that everyone agreed on. Unless it was necessary, they would not even mention it. No matter what happened to the utopia back then, that old senior spent so many years and put in so much effort just to send his research results back to the present realm. As successors, we can't let the efforts of our seniors go to waste. The light green spirit paused for a moment and said in a loud voice through the origin substance communication device, "Although politics is related to academia, the people here basically have nothing to do with politics. Everyone just needs to do their jobs well. Don't let the painstaking efforts of our predecessors go to waste." Voices of agreement sounded. The enthusiasm of many scholars was aroused. Soon, under the Golden Spirit's assignment, they threw themselves into their own positions. "What's wrong? Didn't you say to let everyone work? Why are you still standing here?" The Golden Spirit waved his hand and threw an analysis report to the light green spirit. "Leave these things to the Creator above. What are you still thinking about?" "No, I'm just a little puzzled." The light green spirit pondered for a long time, as if deep in thought. "Since it's about the theory of evolution, then I'm just puzzled about this. What is the proposition of this witch's night? Using the theory of evolution as the main axis, creating a miniature hell, and putting in countless laws to transform it. What was the purpose? This was the final work of a creator, the final demonstration and test at the end of life. After everything was burned, it was only to find an answer from it. But what was the goal of this witch's dream? Was it redemption or bad karma? Don't think about these useless things anymore. The Golden Spirit patted his spirit and stuffed an urgent task over. "You're in charge of the observation mirror and forceps, right? Hurry up and get to work. 5 minutes ago, the present realm sent a request for help. Cartel, the brother who does marine biology research, has a problem. His stepdaughter sneaked in with an invitation letter while the parents weren't paying attention. I'll try to contact my colleagues who went in. See if we can get her out." "What invitation letter? The authority we have to send out should be quite high, right? At the very least, safety is guaranteed. That's why I'm worried about the child playing around." The Golden Spirit shrugged. "Who knows? She might accidentally mess up the entire witch's night. By the way, is that guy Cartel getting married too?" "Oh, that's right. The bride seems to work for the Ocean Commission. Isn't that guy a little too romantic? With the invitation letter, he plans to bring his fiancée to work together with him and go on a honeymoon trip. What a plan." After being stunned for a long time, the light green spirit sighed, helplessly and sincerely lamented, "Let's all explode. Yes, let's all explode." On this point, the nerdy scholars reached a consensus. Then both sides began to have headaches. Where did that little girl go? Just under the snow mountain, Huaishur, who was sitting in the water, looked at the hyenas that were wandering around. Under the command of that guy, they pounced on him. He subconsciously took a step back. Then, the wildness in his blood was offended. He bared his teeth angrily and let out a low, threatening sound. His fur stood up. Huaishur lunged forward, startling the hyenas who were trying to lure her attention. They quickly retreated, but the husky suddenly stopped when she was 2 body lengths away from the hyenas. She stood on her hind legs, raised her paws to both sides, and yelled, "Hey, hey, 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 hey. Everyone, listen to me." In the sudden shock, all the hyenas were stunned. Then they saw Huaishur take a deep breath and say seriously as if he was announcing the truth, "We are all dogs." The leading hyena's expression twitched. It had never seen an explorer with such a strange brain circuit. Was he cursing at them or seeking cooperation? It sneered and tilted its head to ask, "Why? Are you going to say that canines don't fight canines? No, look, everyone knows that you are hyenas." Huaishur raised his paw and pointed at the spots on their bodies. Then he retracted his paw and pointed at himself. "And I am a military dog. What the hell?" The hyena was stunned. At that moment, he saw the husky that stood up like a human suddenly leap and pounce on him with a strange cry. Then the husky waved its two front paws awkwardly twice, twisted its waist, and stomped on the ground with its back foot. Then the husky executed a standard military boxing move. Black tiger steals the heart at the dog's face. Chapter 320. Yes, it should be said that it was a black dog digging out its heart now. But the color was wrong. If it was a spotted dog digging out its heart, the breed was different, and he didn't seem to have dug it out yet. But no matter what, the husky didn't reach a consensus with the criminals this time. With a sudden move, the black dog dug out its heart, and its sharp claws instantly cut open one of the leading hyena's eyes. Only it could talk. If he didn't hit it, who would he hit? Then Huaishur, who could not stand upright, landed on the ground. He opened his mouth, but did not bite the leader's neck. The guy dodged quickly. Then the surrounding hyenas pounced on him. Huaishur supported himself with his front feet and swung his butt. It was a kick he had learned from Brother by Ma. After being kicked countless times, he had already studied this move deeply. Unfortunately, he didn't have hooves and only kicked a hyena away. Then two more pounced on him. One bit Huaishur's butt and the other bit Huaishur's tail. F***CK. Huaishur cried out in pain and heard the leader roar angrily not far away. "Bastard, you're dead meat. I'm going to eat you alive. Are you a dog?" Huaishur endured the pain and sneered. Then he reacted. "Oh, you're..." Then he remembered. Yes, so was he. It was the most convenient to use his mouth. He suddenly swung his butt and ignored the hyena hanging on his tail. He jumped up and opened his mouth at the hyena running towards him, biting down. His teeth closed, and there was a cracking sound. Huaishur shook his head crazily, bit it, and shook it. He suddenly threw it into the water, and a pool of blood rose from the ice river. Huaishur, on the other hand, ignored the other hyenas that were pestering her and pounced straight at the leader of the pack. With a kick of his hind foot, he ignored the fact that he had turned into a dog and forcefully used steps. The leader of the hyenas wanted to sneer when he saw Huaishur rushing over, but then he heard a loud splash in the water. It was as if someone was frying fish. A husky, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, pounced straight at him and hit his face in an instant. Dog escaped secret skill, iron head. The husky's iron head smashed into the hyena's face like a hammer, causing the leader's vision to darken. On the other hand, Huaishur felt that the bones in one of his legs had already been broken. Steps was built on the premise of having an absolute understanding of one's own body. Now, after rashly changing a dog leg, Huaishur still used his previous method of exerting strength and almost tore his balls. It hurt so much that his vision turned black. He did not care about anything and ignored the hyenas that were pouncing on him. He suddenly opened his mouth and bit the leading hyena's throat tightly, shaking it with all his might. At the end of the day, the only way a canine could attack was by using its teeth. Pouncing, scissoring, and lifting were all learned from tigers. Now, Huaishur was using all her strength to bite down on the leader of the hyenas. He couldn't even let out a scream. He struggled madly, raising his claws to claw Huaishur's face and eyes. In the end, under Huaishur's vigorous shaking, he lost all his strength. Huaishur sucked its blood with all his might, ignoring the hyenas that were biting his stomach and body. Even if he was going to die, he would drag him down with him. Within a few seconds, with a crisp sound, the hyena with its neck dislocated was thrown to the ground by Huaishur. He opened his mouth again, bit open his stomach, pulled out the internal organs, and died on the spot. But to Huaishur's surprise, after it died, It turned into light and disappeared. The other hyenas also seemed to have lost their courage. They ignored the seriously injured Huaishur and scattered in an instant. Huaishur lay on the ground, only to see the light fly towards him and enter his body. In front of his eyes, a small progress bar appeared and was filled in an instant. LV2. Level up. The serious injury disappeared in an instant, and he returned to his original healthy state. He even felt stronger than before, and his bones and muscles were stronger. And more importantly, he seemed to have an extra skill point. Amazing. Where did this game system come from? As a level 2 husky, Huaishur was stunned in place, completely unable to figure out how to use this thing that looked like a skill point. Other than the experience bar, there was no system panel where he could add points. System open. Huaishur shouted tentatively. There was no response. Open the skills panel. Still no response. Deep blue. Still no response. Where the hell was he supposed to add points to? Huaishur was completely dumbfounded. Besides, he was now a dog. If he could really add points to it, he might as well make its skin thicker and more resistant to bites. Then he saw the skill point disappear, and he suddenly felt itchy. Yes, itchy. He rolled on the ground for a while, found a stone, and rubbed it for a long time. After rubbing a large piece of stone debris off, he found that the skin under his hair had turned from a tender red to a clear gray, like cowhide, and became tough. Were skill points really used like this? Huaishur thought for a long time, as if he didn't understand. Was this the exploration method of this witch's night? Work hard in PV or PvP. Level up to get points, and then strengthen yourself. Eventually become the bravest dog in the world? What for? After standing in place for a long time, Huaishur shivered, feeling a little unable to withstand the wind hanging down from the snow mountain. No matter what, this was not a place to stay. He thought for a while and walked down the mountain. At the foot of the mountain was a plain, lush green, and there were bushes, woods, and rivers in the distance. For a dog, it was a relatively easy place to hunt. Huaishur found a tree hole that could shelter him from the wind and rain. After driving away a nest of bobcats, he occupied this place. After tidying up a little, he finally felt that something was wrong. Time. Should it be said that time passed too quickly or too slowly? He didn't know. He seemed to have lost his sense of time. A night should only be 8 hours, and he should have at least 5 hours by now. But in these 5 hours, he thought carefully. From the time he went down the mountain until now, it seemed like only 5 or 6 minutes had passed. That wasn't right. Here, time seemed to be deliberately lengthened or shortened. It was difficult to measure it with the outside world. In other words, did he have to stay here for a long time? Huaishur pondered for a moment and decided to take action, to kill small animals indiscriminately. After spending a whole afternoon biting to death many rabbits, bobcats, and all kinds of other things, his level 2 experience bar was almost full. Soon, he found another advantage. It seemed that he didn't have to force himself to eat raw food here. Because he didn't feel hungry, it was as if he had eaten as long as he bit to death. After Huaishur didn't have the resistance to eating raw food, his mood became more relaxed. It was so bloody. How hard would it be to eat? When it was late, Huaishur returned to his nest and laid down between the leaves he picked during the day. When he was ready to sleep, he heard a small and secret sound in the distance. It was as if something was silently walking towards him. The sound of the bushes being moved sounded. Huaishur looked up from the tree hole and then subconsciously held his breath. Under the faint moonlight, he saw a huge, muscular tiger walking towards him. There was still blood on its face, and its eyes were cold and ferocious. He was stunned for a moment and subconsciously wanted to run away. What a joke. How could he fight? He couldn't beat it at all. Was a level 2 dog not a dog? It was arrogant enough to fight with a tiger. Was there something wrong with it? But then he found that he had no way to escape. The tiger was walking straight towards him as if it already knew where he was. It was getting closer and closer. A participant? Huaishur narrowed his eyes and slowly propped himself up in the tree hole, showing his sharp teeth. Since he couldn't escape, he would try his best to teach it a lesson. When the tiger finally approached the edge of the tree hole, Huaishur jumped out of the hole, showed his sharp teeth, and suddenly pounced forward. There was a familiar scream. As the husky pounced, the tiger disappeared. It dissipated like mist. What replaced it was a nervous thing on the ground that looked like a large pine cone. It was still screaming and shouting in panic. Ah, Huaisher, don't eat me. Huaisher was stunned. What was going on? What the hell was that? How could it recognize him? Soon, he reacted and became more and more incredulous. Fu-Yi? How could it be you? It's me. On the ground, the little hedgehog curled up into a ball, looked up at him in panic, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. It wanted to cry, but had no tears. I was scared to death. I thought I was going to be eaten. It's so dangerous here. Come in first. Huaisher glanced around and saw that there were no nocturnal creatures, so he let Fu-Yi enter the tree hole first. 10 minutes later, he stared blankly at the little hedgehog that was lying in his nest and eating wild fruits. He couldn't believe it. So, you accidentally took your mother's invitation and came in? Yes. How careless is your mother? Huaisher covered his head in despair. Sister, do you know that once you fail here, your consciousness will be broken? I have a soul, and most I will be injured, but once you leave, you will automatically be in a vegetative state. Fu-Yi couldn't believe it. Is it so dangerous? Forget it. Huaisher sighed. Don't run around. Follow me. I can carry you no matter what. At worst, we can stay here until the end of the night of the wish. Oh, the little hedgehog nodded, not fully understanding. Wait, how do you know who I am? Huaisher finally reacted and asked blankly, I don't even know that I look like a dog. Huh? Fu-Yi was puzzled. Your name is floating above your head and can be seen from a distance, huh? Wait a minute, it's this plug-in. My map system can show the name of the real explorer. Let me see your information. It shows that you are Huaisher, your species is canine, and your level is 2. Don't you have it? The black question mark above Huaisher's head felt like it was going to break through the sky. Why don't I have such a modern function? Then your tiger just now. It's my skill, don't you have it? Fu-Yi was confused. Huaisher was silent for a long time, then asked dryly, Besides this, what other functions do you have? Well, let's see. Oh, the data of the scholar is so troublesome. I don't understand a lot of the parameters and display data. If I hadn't helped my mother at sea for half a month, I wouldn't even know how to use this interface. Fu-Yi's little claws waved in the air in front of her. A visitation mirror, a map bar that can automatically show the explorers around me, and something that can see people's level. There's a golden remains that has been bound to me, a storage space of about 10 square meters, a small shield, a teleportation device, and, who said that I can't quit? Isn't there a safe exit button here? In the dead silence, Fu-Yi looked up blankly and saw the strange expression of the husky squatting in front of her. She didn't know when, but he seemed to have tears in his eyes. After seeing Fu-Yi looking over, Huaisher rushed up to her, ignoring the thorns all over her body, and hugged her, crying loudly. I want to get more points, Dad. Please carry me. Chapter 3:21. 3 days later, the afternoon sun shone brightly. Spring is here, and the season of recovery has arrived. In the Serengeti grassland of East Africa, hyenas are the most notorious animals. They hunt young animals everywhere in groups, regardless of whether they are herbivores or carnivores. They even gang up to snatch food from cheetahs. Humans don't have a good impression of them, but hyenas don't seem to care. They still run on the grassland according to their own way of life. A husky came to the grassland and began a difficult adventure. I say, Huaisher sighed. Can you remove the broadcasting voice at the beginning of Animal World? Hey, I've been in the school's broadcasting room for a long time. I'm afraid you'll be bored if I dub for you. Keep your voice down. Huaisher shook his head. Then, an inconspicuous bush rustled. As the branches and leaves parted, a hedgehog slowly rose from it. Then, there was a huge dog head. Huaisher's dog head had become Fu-Yi's ride. At this moment, Fu-Yi sat on the dog's head as if she was riding a tall horse. She looked very proud. Huaisher's ice-blue eyes looked around vigilantly and saw a few hyenas lazily basking in the sun after snatching other people's food not far away. It's them? Yes, pay attention to the biggest one. It's a level 4 hyena, and the others are level 2. There are no explorers among them. Fu-Yi whispered. Let's do it the old way. Yes, the old way. The doghead nodded, lay down, and put Fu-Yi on the ground. After I go up and bite you, pay attention to the last hit later. Don't go too far in front, or you'll be finished with one bite. I have a shield. I'm not afraid. The little hedgehog waved her claws confidently. You've been strengthened. Hurry up. Huaisha rolled his eyes at her and continued to lie in the grass, moving forward little by little, trying not to disturb the branches. He could smell the stench getting heavier and heavier in the upper wind. There were at least 10 hyenas here. If they didn't do well, they would be dead meat. Huaisha calmed down and slowly inched forward with its butt raised. When the distance between them was less than 10 meters, 8 dagger-like fingernails popped out from its front claws and scratched the stone, leaving 4 white marks. Just as the hyenas noticed the unusual noise, a husky the size of a calf had already pounced out of the bushes, whistling as it approached. Eat my fist. The level 4 hyena leader did not even have time to react. When he looked up, he saw Huaisha's claws coming down on him, leaving a few bloody marks on his face. The hyena leader roared in pain. His body suddenly expanded, and he spat out a beam of fire at Huaisha. Then, Huaisha followed up with an uppercut claw. With a crack, the hyena's open mouth was forcibly closed by him. Immediately, the fire disappeared without a trace, leaving only 2 plumes of thick smoke coming out of the hyena's ears. Huaisha had already opened his mouth, which glowed with a metallic light, and closed it down on the hyena's throat, biting off its cervical vertebra in an instant. However, he was not in a hurry to take its life. He turned and pounced on a few hyenas that were charging at him. After the toughness of his skin had been increased, the hyenas could not bite at all. Huaisha could kill a child with 1 punch. He scratched 2 to death in an instant and bit another in his mouth. He used the dog version of use steps on a hyena that was trying to escape. After the headbutt attack, the hyena pack was instantly reduced to a mess. More hyenas had already scattered in all directions, but right in front of them, a little hedgehog suddenly jumped out of the grass. The hyenas pretended not to see it and continued to run forward. Then, they saw a big tiger with a white forehead appear in the air, roaring angrily at them. A fishy wind blew in their faces. The illusion dissipated in an instant, but it was enough for Huaisha to pounce on them and finish them off. If these level 2 hyenas encountered a level 4 husky and could not rely on the group, they would be completely useless. After 4 of them escaped, there were still 8 left. Huaisha accidentally bit 3 to death, and the rest were all half dead. Fu yelled and jumped up, stabbing and stabbing the hyenas with his spikes. He didn't know if the hyenas were angered to death or if they were stabbed to death. Anyway, after stabbing 4 or 5 hyenas to death, he finally rose to level 4. The hedgehog's opening was too weak. Although it had an illusion skill, it had almost no damage output. After this upgrade, Fu Yi's body trembled, and the spikes on her body trembled twice before emitting a metallic glow. Then, with a soft shout, 2 spikes shot out like arrows, piercing into the throats of 2 hyenas. It was very convenient now. Wow, Fu-Yi, you're losing hair. Huaisha, who was watching from the sidelines, was dumbfounded, and then Fu-Yi rolled her eyes at him. When it came to the last leader, Fu-Yi thought for a moment and stepped aside. You do it. Now that the main damage output is yours, you should be level 5 after taking it down, right? Huaisha did not decline. Their progress was already a little behind. Yesterday, Fu-Yi had seen a level 7 explorer through the plug-in. After the explorer that had evolved into a lion circled the dense forest a few times, it didn't find any prey and left resentfully. Huaisha and Fu-Yi were so scared that they broke out in a cold sweat. After killing the leader in 1 bite and taking the big gift pack, Huaisha imagined an upgrade sound effect in his head. The progress bar was full again. LV5. In the first 4 levels, he strengthened his fur, bones, muscles, and claws respectively. This time, he simply used the skill points on his overall physique. After lying on the ground for a while and trembling nervously, Huaisher got up again and found that he had actually grown bigger. He had already surpassed the scope of a large dog and entered the scope of a beast. Apart from a pair of icy blue eyes that revealed a classic idiot temperament from time to time, it was completely impossible to tell that this was a husky. What surprised him even more was that his originally thin supply of origin substance was gradually filling up, no longer as dry and scarce as it had been in the past. Based on this momentum, once he reached level 10, he would be able to take back the spirit energy that Crow had saved for him. In comparison, Fu Yi's body did not grow at all, but her speed and fur became sharper, and the duration of the skill was longer, and the duration of the beast transformation was longer. However, with Fu Yi, a GM player who had opened the official cheat, it was really too convenient. As soon as the map was opened, it was clear where the monsters were, and leveling up was simply too easy. The only downside was that the leveling speed was too fast, and Huaisher was almost unable to fit in the tree hole. But fortunately, this group of hyenas still occupied a cave. It seemed that the place to live in the future would be more spacious. By the time he finished cleaning up the area, Fu Yi had already skipped into the house, and then came out in a hurry. Huaisher, 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 Fu Yi shouted. Come over and see. What? Huaisher ran over with small steps, lay down, and then put Fu Yi on his head and crawled into the cave. Then he was stunned on the spot. What the hell was this? In the cave, it was a mess. A group of hyenas naturally couldn't be expected to clean up. But what shocked Huaisher wasn't the mess here, but the mottled and faded mural on the wall. On the light gray wall, there was a group of people who looked like snakes. As if they were performing some kind of sacrifice, they circled around the high platform, and their movements were like a dance. And on the high platform, there were several shadows that looked like mountains at first glance, but upon closer inspection, they had the outline and characteristics of wild beasts like mountains. Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air. Is there still a civilization in this world? He couldn't believe it. In his memories, all civilizations had been completely destroyed under the attack of the catastrophe. He even doubted if there were people in this world. But after so long, he didn't even find a monkey on this grassland, let alone a human. There wasn't even a primate's eye. Humans seemed to have been abandoned by this world. They had disappeared. In other words, what we saw on the grass 2 days ago were really wool tracks. Huaisher couldn't believe it. Maybe, to have something like a wheel, the level of civilization must not be low. Look at the Aztecs. It said that they didn't even have wheels a few hundred years ago. That's a special situation, okay? Huaisher curled his lips. A bunch of guys who were so advanced in mathematics that they pushed the calendar to 10,000 years later were passionate about living sacrifices every day. After more than 1,000 years, they didn't even have a wheel. It had to be said that they were a bunch of weirdos. Then, should we go take a look? Fu Yi thought for a moment and asked. Let's not for now. Huaisher shook his head. There are still so many monsters in the newbie village that we haven't fought yet. If we go to Stormwind City, I'm afraid that the dog's brain will crawl out. Why Stormwind City and not Orgrimmar? Didn't you hear? The great chief's legs died again, and he was called trash by a trash scriptwriter. The horde is so difficult. Yeah, it's too difficult. The dog and the hedgehog looked at each other, shook their heads, and sighed. Now that you're level 5 and I'm level 4, can we consider fighting a wave of elite monsters? Fu Yi thought for a moment, and her eyes lit up again. The elite monster that Fu Yi mentioned was another explorer. They found a pack of wolves by the lake last night. There were about 17 or 18 of them. Their levels weren't low, and the leading wolf was also level 5. But on this night of the witch, it seemed that strengthening oneself wasn't the only way to level up. Just like the guy who led the pack of hyenas to attack Huaisher, skill points could be used to expand and improve his own pack, which was to increase his subordinates. Subordinates could also level up through leveling, but it was much slower than the explorer himself. There was no doubt that in the early stages, when there was no damage output, these explorers with numbers were the strongest. If they were good at controlling, they might be very strong in the later stages. The guy who occupied the lakeside seemed to be waiting for something. He never moved from his nest. Huaisha approached him last time, but he was chased for 2 miles by 3 wolves. They were all dogs, so why couldn't they be good friends? It did seem to rhyme when he thought about it. If Huaisha could successfully kill the leader like this time, they might be able to get this wave of experience. Huaisha hesitated for a long time and was about to shake his head when he heard Fu Yi's voice. According to the map, there's a skeleton there. Huaisha gritted his teeth and clapped his paws. Let's do it. Chapter 322. Huaisha didn't know what the remains were, but Fu Yi did, and it was the GM account that was bound to her, the golden remains. It sounded awesome, so of course Huaisha wanted one. In the past 2 days, he had been guessing, and combined with the explanation Crow gave him before, he almost understood what the Night of the Witch was. Although it was named after the night in history when witches and devils made deals, in fact, it should be an abyss experiment that treated all entrants as test subjects. Before a creator died, he created his life's work and exploration into this illusory dream, intending to get the answer he had been searching for in his last dream. It was like an individual developer's decryption game going online from this huge server in the present realm, handing over all operating rights to the server management company and donating his own property and all his efforts for free. The Astronomy Society had the right to maintain this game, and they could even use their own ability to set up several GM accounts in this game and continue to unpack it externally. It didn't matter. If the Astronomy Society wanted to integrate this power into the present realm, then it must cooperate with the creator to complete this experiment. The internal iron rules could not be changed. If it could be completed, then the Astronomy Society, the participants, and the creator would all benefit. Even if the creator had passed away at that time, his last obsession could still receive the results. If one hears the truth in the morning, one can die in the evening. Without such determination and backbone, not to mention the creator, they couldn't even be a scholar. This was also the reason why the Astronomy Society took the initiative to recruit explorers on a wide scale and even sent out most of the GM accounts. The last lesson of a creator was a rare opportunity for scholars. If they could enter it, get the approval of the creator, and inherit the mantle, it would be a good thing. But forget about inheriting the mantle. The experiment was called an experiment because the probability of success was slim. This was a gamble that one would make after pursuing it for a lifetime without success. It was the same for all explorers. Even if the creator was extraordinarily merciful and didn't involve the bodies of all explorers, if they failed, their souls would be shattered and they would be seriously injured. This was a journey of archaeology and exploration with huge risks. Whether it was for the purpose of maximizing benefits or out of respect for the creator, these participants with additional authority would not mess around. In order to prevent internal interference and bugs from appearing, all the permissions that were given were mainly for self-protection. The purpose was to prevent the scholars and ascenders from being killed by first sight kill and bad luck at the very beginning of the exploration process. As for the appearance of the little hedgehog, who had accidentally obtained the GM authority, teaming up with the husky, who had always lacked a screw in her head, was something unexpected. After going through a lot of trouble, the pale golden spirit finally found Fu Yi's location through the external observation mirror and spiritual manipulation tweezers. After seeing that her consciousness and vital signs were all fine, it immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Without thinking too much, he directly contacted the girl through the authority of the astronomy club. Then, he hurriedly squeezed out the warmest smile, wanting to comfort the girl who was panicking. Then, an expressionless hedgehog picked up the video call. He was still chewing on a fruit and spat out 2 seeds on the ground. He asked casually, "Who is it?" This was not what he had imagined. The scholar behind the spirit was dumbfounded for a long time. He could not hold back his smile. Is this Miss Fu Yi? Your father is Cartel. My father's surname is not Cartel. You got the wrong number. Ha! The call was hung up. Wrong number? The golden spirit was stunned on the spot. He picked up the information in a daze and kept comparing it. No, there was no mistake. He connected again. Miss Fu Yi, I'm very sorry to have involved you in an accident. Please cooperate with my instructions. We can safely let you leave this conflict. Even the most unruly girl would cooperate after knowing that she could escape the sea of suffering, right? He gave himself a thumbs up. No need to be sorry. I'm doing quite well. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up. Fu-Yi pressed the red button. The call was hung up. The spirit was stunned on the spot, dumbfounded. Damn, what's with doing quite well? Miss, are you taking this as a vacation? Stop fooling around. It's very dangerous here. Okay? What's going on? The pale green spirit drifted over with two other spirits. Didn't we find her? Why isn't she out yet? Mr. Smith, you have to help her. One of the spirits grabbed Smith's hand in panic. She's Plum's only daughter. You can't let anything happen to her. I can't do anything if she doesn't want to cooperate. Smith looked helplessly at Cartel for a long time. I say, is there a problem with the communication between you two? Bullsh asterisk T. The other spirit was furious. That's my daughter. Smith looked at the furious division chief, Fu, and then at the embarrassed Cartel beside him. He was dumbfounded and seemed to have understood something. He looked at the light green spirit in shock. Why didn't you tell me that Cartel's wife was also a man? The pale green spirit was dumbfounded. He didn't know why Smith was looking at him. He also didn't know that Smith had already imagined a plot of millions of words in just a few seconds. Two lonely men met in the rain. It was a wonderful meeting. They were hung over in the bar. When they woke up, they had a beautiful misunderstanding. At first, there was resistance, then hesitation, followed by pain. Finally, under the call of true love, they made up their minds. After overcoming many difficulties, they finally got together. Oh my God, they even adopted a girl. How positive. He was so touched that he was about to cry. I admire your courage, the two of you. Smith grabbed their hands and said with tears in his eyes, I've always wanted to be like you, but I don't have the courage. What the F*** are you talking about? Director Fu was about to go crazy. Where's my daughter? My daughter is so old now. She's gone just because of an invitation letter? Ahem, Mr. Fu, you have to say that this is an accident. Besides Plum and I, no one else has the authority to activate the invitation letter. Cartel comforted him helplessly. Don't worry, the Astronomy Association will not let anything happen to Fu-Yi. Don't worry, my ass. Director Fu subconsciously touched his waist. He didn't find his gun and punched Cartel's head. He forgot that he was a spirit now. If Cartel didn't want him, he wouldn't even be able to spit. He was instantly filled with grief and anger. I only have one daughter. One daughter. Thinking that his daughter was going to be taken away by this foreigner. Even a man as tough as old Fu couldn't help but feel sad. Mangnan cried, It's fine if you want to take her overseas to study, but you should at least take her away alive and kicking. What the hell is going on here? She's nowhere to be found. Be more decent, Mr. Fu. Li Mei finally came online. She glared at her ex-husband and was about to say something when she remembered that this wasn't the place to quarrel. She sighed and looked at Smith. Sorry for the trouble, Dr. Smith. Is there no way to take her out directly? The main thing is that the rules of the transmission will conflict with the internal rules. If it's not necessary, it's best not to do so. Then please contact her again. We will persuade her to cooperate with you. Let me try. Smith was about to operate the device when he froze. After a long time, he looked up in shock. I think I've been blocked by her. On the screen, Fu-Yi's porcupine profile picture had already dimmed. Only the last message was flashing. I'm going out for a walk. Everything is fine. Don't worry, Mom and Dad. I'll be back soon, probably. Everyone present fell into a long silence. What was this? Was the rebellious period coming? Had she finally run away from home? Look, at least she left you a message. In the dead silence, Smith summoned up the courage to comfort them. Isn't it good to broaden your horizons during puberty? Then he felt 3 sharp gazes looking at him. His face twitched, and he couldn't help but cover his face. What the hell was going on? In the freshly cleaned cave, Huaisher awkwardly used his claws to gather the dry leaves on the ground, wanting to make a floor. Hearing the sound behind him, he turned around and saw a little hedgehog walking in from outside. He was a little puzzled. Where did you go? Taking a bath. I almost fell into the river. Don't mention it. Little Hedgehog shook off the water on her body and rubbed against Huaishi's body. Anyway, Huaishi's skin was thick, and she wasn't afraid of being pricked. She was like a thick towel. Huaishi was pricked twice by her, and his face twitched. "What are you doing?" Fu-Yi looked at the pile of small, dry leaves. "I want to make a fire, but my claws scratched for a long time, and it didn't burn. So I used the remaining leaves to make a bed for you. Try it." Little Hedgehog jumped on it, bounced twice, and became happy. "Not bad. It's not cold anymore." "That's good." Huaishi blew the dust on the stone and lay on it. "Go to sleep. We'll fight elite monsters tomorrow." "Okay." Fu-Yi also lay down. Huaishi closed his eyes, hugged his tail, and fell asleep. In a long silence, there was a movement in the dead leaves, and something small crawled up his arm. It found a comfortable place on his head, lay down, and stopped moving. Huaishi opened his eyes and looked up. Of course, he couldn't see anything, but he felt strangely warm. It was as if his good brother had put a hat on him. Wasn't it pretty good? He closed his eyes. Outside the cave, the night gradually deepened. Chapter 3:23. The next morning, they were awakened by a loud noise. Huaishi got up from the ground vigilantly and looked out of the cave, only to see the gray sky and lightning swimming in the sky. Very soon, as the hurricane whistled past, bean-sized raindrops sprinkled down from the sky. They shattered on the ground, emitting a series of low rumbling sounds. In an instant, a torrential rain poured down. The river suddenly rose, and the turbid water washed down from the mountain with a large amount of mud, forming new tributaries on the ground. If this cave wasn't located at a high place, it would probably be filled with mud, right? Amidst the earth-shaking rumbling, countless lightning bolts struck down from the mountains in the distance, as if they were going to tear the world outside this shelter into pieces. The whole world seemed to have become violent. Who was transcending the tribulation here? Huaishi instinctively wanted to yell, but Fu-Yi kicked her in the head. She immediately reacted. "How are we supposed to fight elite monsters in this weather?" "Do you want to rest?" he asked. "We agreed to explore together. We have to go even if it's windy or rainy. What are you hesitating for? Let's go." Fu-Yi raised her small paw and pointed forward, looking energetic. Huaishi thought for a moment and tried to put on a serious expression on his dog face. "This is not a game." "I know." Fu-Yi nodded. "If necessary, quickly withdraw yourself, understand?" Huaishi instructed again. "Don't worry about me. I'm an ascender, much stronger than you." "Got it. Don't worry." Fu-Yi promised. "I'm dressed in godly equipment. What's there to be afraid of?" "Okay, then let's go." "Let's go." And so, braving the storm, the big dog and little hedgehog set off. Fu-Yi. 2 hours later, Huaishi struggled to poke his head out of the mud, spitting out the dirty water in his mouth, and looked around blankly. Fu-Yi, where are you?" "I'm here." Little Hedgehog sat on a piece of rotten wood and rowed over like a boat. "It's just ahead. I saw it on the map. I saw it too, in the midst of the storm." Huaishi looked in despair at the rolling, turbid river in the distance. A river channel that had suddenly formed had blocked the way. From time to time, huge logs and large and small stones floated in the muddy water and rushed downstream. Huaishi felt that she should change her subject to be called pike fish if she could climb out after falling down, not to mention wading through it. "Don't move." Huaishi dog-paddled with all his might. He turned around and instructed Fu-Yi. Then he stretched out his neck, opened his mouth wide, and picked her up, baring his teeth. It was pricked. This time, it was really a case of a dog biting a porcupine. "It stinks. Why don't you brush your teeth?" Fu-Yi lay between her teeth and curiously pulled at his lips. Her little claws tugged at Huaishi's lips, causing him to grimace and feel even more pain. "Don't move." He shook his head and tried his best to step on the water. He climbed onto a muddy beach and looked at the shallow water area not far away and the violent river further away. It was about more than 200 meters. Fortunately, it was still okay. He took a deep breath, and then 2 hot steams spurted out from his nose. He bent down, stepped on the mud under his feet with his 4 paws, and moved his body. "What are you going to do?" Fu-Yi was stunned. "What else can I do?" Huaisher lowered his head and put on a posture of accumulating power. The muscles on his two hind legs jumped crazily. His body temperature soared, shaking up a patch of rainwater and turning it into a faint white gas. Of course, Rush. Before he finished speaking, the husky's figure on the muddy beach suddenly blurred. The half of the swastika had been left behind by him. In an instant, his forelegs stepped on the mud, and a patch of muddy mud burst out with a loud noise. The mud flew up, splashed in the air, and fell together with the rain. And the giant wolf had already rushed forward. A roar burst forth. You step. In the mighty low roar of the muddy water and the torrential rain, there was suddenly the sound of iron rubbing against each other. Huaisher stepped on the water and rushed forward. The meat pads on his forepaws slapped on the water surface, as if he was knocking on a stone, and there was a loud bang. Under this incredible explosive force, the water surface was like marble being rammed by a hammer. Fleeting cracks appeared on the water surface, and then layers of ripples were set off amidst the roar. The giant wolf broke through the rain and flew through the air. He kept passing on the floating trees, stones, and even other animals, trampling them into the outskirts of the torrent, and rushed forward. It was as if he was soaring in the rain. In an instant, he swept over a distance of more than 200 meters and threw Fu Yi in front of him. Then, he couldn't stop himself in time and fell flat on his face. When Huaisher tried to pull his head out of the mud, his whole body was paralyzed in the mud, and he had no strength left. He had to rely on Fu Yi to poke his nose open with a branch, or he would have been suffocated by the mud. Don't ask me to explore next time, he panted weakly. After the level 5 evolution, his physical strength was completely above the animals in the present realm, and he had stepped into the category of exotic beasts. Even so, he still felt extremely strained. If the river was a little wider, he wouldn't have been able to climb over. Now his forelegs were aching faintly. If he were to do it again, he would really be committing suicide by jumping into the river. Fortunately, this place wasn't far from where the wolf pack was, so he didn't have to trudge any further. While Huaisher was lying on the ground in a sorry state, panting and resting, Fu Yi volunteered to sneak into the rain to investigate the enemy. After about 10 minutes, Fu Yi came back in a hurry and jumped in front of Huaisher. We seem to be late. What? Huaisher was stunned. What do you mean we're late? Someone's starting a monster, Fu Yi said. They have the same idea as us. From afar, Huaisher heard a loud clap of thunder. Moo! A chill shot up to the sky. A burst of fine vibrations came from afar, causing the mud under Huaisher's feet to shake. Huaisher subconsciously wanted to run away with his tail between his legs. If Fu Yi hadn't poked him, he wouldn't have realized what he was doing. Instinct. No, it should be said that the instinct of this beast was suppressed. He felt a sense of danger and understood that there were terrifying enemies in front of him, so he subconsciously wanted to run away. Why are you fine? He looked at Fu Yi blankly. What do you mean? Fu Yi tilted her head in confusion. My ears are just a little sore from the roar, but you've been in a daze. Is a dog's hearing so good? No matter what, it definitely had nothing to do with hearing. Huaisher looked at the faintly discernible protective shield around Fu Yi, and she could not help but feel a tinge of jealousy in her heart. Being a GM was so nice. Even the protective shield was smart and could be activated at any time. When he finally approached the direction of the roar with Fu Yi on his back, he poked his head out of the tall grass that had been soaked by the rain. He felt a burst of bone-piercing cold, and there was a bull that was dyed red with blood. A huge bull. It seemed to be made of black iron. When its four hooves stomped on the ground, there was a low roar like that of a drum. What was even more shocking was that under its trampling, the accumulated rain and mud spread out layers of pale frost and were frozen solid. The impact of the rainstorm on the terrain was completely offset, and it even became the bull's strength. Just looking at the bull that was as cold as an ice house, Huaisher couldn't help but be speechless. F***CK, people and ghosts are all showing off. He looked at Fu Yi blankly. Am I the only one who isn't a pay-to-win player? Yes, that's right. You're the only one. Keep your voice down. They're fighting. Fu Yi pulled Huaishi's ear and motioned for him to focus on the situation in the field. She lowered her voice and said, "The bull is level 8, and the elite monster is already level 7. So fast." Huaishi was dumbfounded, but she immediately reacted. With so many underlings, their hunting efficiency would definitely skyrocket. In any case, whatever rabbit or pheasant they caught, as long as it was still alive, it would be enough for her to finish it off. If the quality was not good, the quantity would make up for it. With so many dogs gathering firewood, it would definitely be much more efficient than Huaishi's dog, at most with an assistant. A level 7 wolf pack was completely different from a level 5 wolf pack. Just the number of wolves alone had exceeded 30. 30 bloodthirsty gray wolves were rare in the present realm. If they were to be thrown into the present realm, the local forestry bureau would be so scared that they would call the army. 34 of them. 7 of them are already level 4, and the rest are level 2 and level 3. Fu Yi looked down at the data of her plug-in. In short, they're definitely not much worse than that cow. Not only that, this was not a fantasy novel where a difference in level could kill. The difference in level, in addition to body size and physique, was just a few extra evolution points. At least for now, quality would definitely not make up for the difference in quantity. With another thunderous roar, the bull trampled on the frozen ground under its feet and charged toward the wolf pack. The bull's blood-stained horns were still hung with tragic pieces of meat. With just a charge, the wolf pack's formation was pierced. 2 unlucky wolves were kicked to death, and an even more unlucky one was directly skewered on the bull's horn. It did not seem to have much breath left. After piercing through the formation in one breath, the giant frost bull suddenly shook its head, shaking off the dying wolf on top of its head. It then suddenly charged toward the wolf pack again. In the grass, Huaishi was already moving stealthily like a dog. "Hey, what are you doing?" Last hit. Huaishi put Fu Yi on his head and carefully groped in the direction of the wolf. No matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat. Thieves don't leave empty-handed, you know? The tall grass completely covered his body. Under the cover of the heavy rain, even their scent was difficult to catch. In any case, Huaishi's dog nose couldn't smell them, and they probably didn't have any official help from the Astronomical Society. Now that the final battle was about to begin, how could they care about the 2 Voldemort hiding beside them? With the help of Fu Yi's illusion, they perfectly sneaked into the vicinity. Huaishi raised his claws and pointed forward. Fu Yi understood tacitly and shot out a spike. It did not hit. It was crooked. Cough, cough. I'll use auxiliary aiming. Wait for me. Fu Yi rummaged through a pile of plugins. Soon, with another shake, an arrow-like spike silently flew out and pierced the head of the unlucky wolf. Experience points obtained. In front, there's one more. After understanding the joy of last hits, Fu Yi became even more enthusiastic than a player playing Dota. Her eyes shone with a golden light. A few more, and I'll be level 5 too. Okay, Huaishi readily agreed. Not far away from the tragic battle, they secretly began to harvest the fruits of other people's labor. It was more exciting than stealing vegetables. Chapter 3:24. Reality proved that obtaining something without working for it was addictive. In less than a few minutes, Fu Yi had already risen to tier 5. She curled up into a ball and trembled for a moment. When she crawled up again, she was actually smaller than before, but the tip of her thorns had become even sharper. Huaishi accidentally touched her, and a thorn-like sensation turned into iron needles that pricked his paws painfully. More importantly, the origin-substance fluctuations in Fu Yi's eyes were becoming thicker. Huaishi, I have a new skill." She jumped up and down on Huaishi's head in pleasant surprise. Look! Huaishi's eyes rolled up, but he couldn't see anything. If he didn't look in the mirror, who would be able to see what was growing out of his head? Very quickly, the faint outline of a hedgehog jumped onto the ground in front of him. It shook its body, creating a blurry image in the rain. Invisibility. Huaishi's eyes widened. It should be hazy, My panel tells me that it's a camouflage of an origin substance. I don't know what it is, but if you don't look closely, you won't be able to see it, right? Fine, it was a high-tier ghillie suit. The poor Huaishir took another bite of lemon. Immediately afterwards, he discovered that as Fu Yi lay on top of him, his figure had also become hazy. It was actually a support-type skill. Go, 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 hurry, hurry, hurry. If you don't finish him off, it'll be too late. Fu Yi could already see that on the bloody battlefield, not too far away, a few heavily injured wolves were about to die. The battle between the wolf pack and the ice bull had already reached a climax. They didn't even notice the foreign dog twisting and crawling under the mud and grass. Even with the ice bull's majesty and might, its body was already dripping with blood. The wolf pack had already torn open a few bone-deep wounds. However, only half of the wolf pack remained, and the alpha wolf situation was even worse. When dealing with this kind of heavyweight opponent, the wolf pack should have used their advantage in numbers and speed to kite and bleed from afar. Even if they didn't have the geographical advantage, they could still use their advantage in numbers. Unfortunately, he didn't have a single one of them. The terrain was in the enemy's favor. If he wanted to make use of his speed advantage, he would have to abandon the remains that he had been defending for a long time. But after the enemy had obtained the remains, would they still be willing to kite him? At that time, it would be too late to even fart, let alone have a Pokemon. For the Ice Bull, there was no way out. If he didn't take advantage of this opportunity to eliminate the leader of the wolf pack, he would have to face the wolf pack's kiting tactics even if he managed to snatch the remains. Both sides were equally caught in a dilemma. They could only display the spirit of drawing their swords and recklessly fight when enemies meet on a narrow path. Today, either you die or you die. With this kind of determination, the killing intent on both sides became even stronger. However, their movements became even more cautious, unwilling to leave any chance for their enemies. He kept probing, and probing again. They wished they could wave at each other to show their friendliness. In the distance, Huaishir was crouching in the grass, drenched in the rain. He carefully poked his head out to look. Seeing the fight in the field, he only wanted to rush up and shout, "Stop fighting! You can't kill people like this." However, what did this have to do with him? A cold and ruthless killing machine? With the camouflage of the ghillie suit and Fu Yi, who had now transformed into a small invisible pistol, he was getting more and more happy with his killing. Those that were further away in the field were shot down by Fu Yi. Those that were closer to him in the grass were shot down by Huaishir. In just a few minutes, his level 5 progress bar was already full. In the field, the Wolf King was getting more and more panicked. He felt that the number of his underlings was continuously decreasing. After the heavy rain eliminated the sound of the spikes piercing through the air, the mud and blood covered the bullet holes on the corpses. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see any clues. However, he didn't have the time to look carefully now. In his heart, he only thought that his underlings had died from serious injuries. He hated the Ice Bull even more. The Ice Bull waited for a long time, but didn't receive any experience points. He only thought that this pack of wolves was pretending to be dead. He became more and more afraid in his heart. Soon, he couldn't hold back his impulse. 2 rough breaths came out of his nostrils, and the frost under his feet suddenly spread. After a roar, the Ice Bull galloped forward like a tank again. This time, after breaking through the pack of wolves, he actually ran straight for the alpha wolf. The sharp horns of the bull were like spears. Wherever they passed, the rainwater froze on them, forming sharp icicles. More importantly, the rainwater on his body was frozen by the cold, forming a thick layer of armor. The teeth of the pack of wolves couldn't bite through it all. This bastard is going all out. The Wolf King's pupils contracted instantly. Looking at the Ice Bull galloping over, he turned around and wanted to escape. However, how could he make it in time? In an instant, the bull was already in front of him. He only remembered to twist his body. The wolf and the bull brushed past each other. In an instant, the Wolf King flew out. Half of his body was crushed. However, the Ice Bull let out a blood-curdling scream. He staggered and slid to the ground. In the frozen mud, the blazing red color of blood continued to gush out. From his abdomen, on his abdomen, there was a huge crack that looked like it had been cut by an axe. Who knew how many intestines and organs were cut off? It was like a hot knife cutting through feces. On one hand, his abdomen wasn't drenched in the rain, so the frost armor wasn't thick enough. On the other hand, more importantly, the Wolf King finally revealed his tail. It was covered with a sharp and hard shell, just like an axe. With one blow, he had completely injured the enemy. The Wolf King let out a sharp laugh and tried to prop himself up. However, he fell to the ground immediately after, unable to get up. His spine was broken. Copper head, iron back, tofu waste. Although it wasn't to the extent of tofu, at least the traditional proverb made sense. Hand over the remains. I will let you go. The ice bull let out a deep and deep voice that was filled with coldness. Otherwise, I'll send you off today. Huh? Are you kidding me? The Wolf King sneered. My wolf pack still has 8 wolves. Who do you think will be the one sending me off? He raised his head and let out a mournful scream. His whole body shook violently. The wounds and broken bones twitched crazily and actually recovered quite a bit. He still had 1 evolution point that he didn't use. At this moment, the Wolf King, who had leveled up, was the same as the Ice Bull, reaching level 8. More importantly, he didn't use the points on himself. Instead, he hardened his heart and strengthened his subordinates. Following his long howl, the bodies of his remaining 8 wolves swelled up. Their fur had a metallic luster. Under the push of his evolution points, they had mutated. Without waiting for his command, the 8 wolves screamed and pounced forward, attacking the Ice Bull lying on the ground. Following that, there was a thunderous roar. The Ice Bull roared angrily. Blood gushed out from his wounds again, but it was immediately frozen into a blood-red armor. This time, it was even more exaggerated. The terrifying chill almost formed a wave that swept out in all directions in an instant, engulfing the few giant wolves, covering them and freezing them in the quagmire. Only one of them jumped up immediately and snatched the frozen armor, but it was immediately killed in the air by the charging bull. Die for this, Grandpa! The blood-red eyes of the Ice Bull roared. Ignoring the pain in his abdomen, he charged towards the Wolf King again. With a bang, the Wolf King's tail was wedged into the Ice Bull's face and was frozen. Following the Ice Bull's charge, the Wolf King was once again sent flying. Its tail was forcibly broken in the air. When it landed on the ground again, there were 2 bloody holes on its body. Blood and broken organs were constantly spurting out. It was obvious that it was not going to survive. However, without waiting for the Ice Bull to smile, he saw the Wolf King's blood spurting out. A layer of blood flew in the air and suddenly outlined a stupefied silhouette. What the F***CK? The husky, who was lying in the mud, looked down blankly and saw the Wolf King lying beside him. The Wolf King also saw him. A trace of shock and anger appeared in its bloodshot eyes. The foreign dog and the local wolf looked at each other. Who is it? The Ice Bull roared. Its eyes widened as it stared at the dazed husky. After pondering for a moment, Huaisher suddenly jumped out of the bushes under the shocked gazes of the two. It stood up like a human and spread its paws, striking a strange pose. It spoke with a trembling voice. First, never act on impulse. What? The Ice Bull thought that it was hearing things. Second, never miss a single bad thing. The husky raised the little hedgehog in its hand and said seriously, Third, be fair and beautiful as the referee. I will be the referee for this battle of the remains. Huaisher shouted. The captain of the sleigh team is here to report. Then, the captain of the sleigh team raised its paw and ejected a fingernail as sharp as a dagger. It slashed downwards and slit the Wolf King's neck. After the nonsense was over, it got to work. Its movements were clean and agile. Blood spurted out. The referee was over. The captain of the sleigh team ended the battle with Wu Zhiga. It was perfect. Before the stunned Ice Bull could react, Fu Yi, who was held in Huaisher's other paw and had been holding her breath for a long time, immediately put on the aiming aid plug-in of the 8X scope. Without any pressure on the gun, she fired more than 10 shots at the ice bull without making a sound. The ice bull only felt his vision go black as Fu Yi turned him into a hedgehog. Two sharp thorns pierced directly into his eyes and wedged into his skull. It did not know what nerves were affected, but it made him struggle madly on the spot. However, he could not get up. Soon, the wound on his abdomen ruptured again and blood gushed out. The ice bull was no longer breathing. Fu Yi was still a little worried. She added 2 more thorns until a terrifying amount of experience points surged in. In an instant, she was pushed to level 7. Huaishir was also level 7. His level 5 progress bar was already full. After killing the Wolf King, the crazy influx of experience points directly filled more than half of his level 7 progress bar. Unlike Fu Yi, Huaishir did not choose to evolve directly. Instead, he rushed to the frozen giant wolves on the ground and gave his distant relatives a simple and honest smile. Then he raised his paw and dagger-like fingernails popped out. After eating all 7 of the remaining wolves, Huaishir was only a small amount of experience points away from reaching level 8. More importantly, Huaishir carried the hedgehog and used his claws to forcefully tear apart the straw on the high ground by the lake. He saw a huge pit that was almost filled with mud, and a black boulder with scales faintly revealed, just like a sleeping giant. Just looking at it made him feel the pressure and fear from his bloodline. As he carefully stretched out his claws and pressed them on the protruding boulder, a display box suddenly popped up in front of his eyes. Obsidian remains detected. Level insufficient, 7 out of 10. Huaishir sucked in a breath of cold air. This is the remains. Chapter 325. Login code FKP 4761. Registration name Huan Lu. Verification in progress. Authentication complete. Access granted. On the huge screen, a blurry phantom of a human figure slowly emerged. After breaking through the constraints of pixels, half of its body poked out as if it was a ridiculous scene in a dream. He looked at the woman in front of him and slowly nodded. Welcome back to the Continuation Institute, Dr. Mei Li. Do you have any orders? I want to see the teacher, Li Mei said straightforwardly. The creator, Sha, is in a meeting, then leave a message. I can wait here. I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Sha may return to the laboratory directly later. The possibility of receiving a message is not high. Message from the laboratory. I have the authority to call the teacher. Recorded for you. Please wait. The human figure nodded and once again spoke in the indescribable electric voice. In the meantime, please wait patiently. If you have any needs, please let me know at any time. Li Mei did not speak again. In all fairness, the Continuation Court was undoubtedly a strange, loose, and secretive organization compared to the Directorate of Defense, which mainly coordinated the overall situation. As the keeper of most forbidden technologies and miracles, and the department that maintained the 3 major restrictions of the present realm, its main body was hidden in a secret border. It was heavily sealed, and even the intention to explore its existence was a crime. And what most people really came into contact with was the various subordinate institutions derived from the Continuation Institute itself. For example, based on the most advanced internal life technology, hospitals all over the present realm and the border, and the Eternal Fund, which operated as a purely independent investment fund. Unlike the technical department, which mainly applied to the exploration of the present realm and high-precision technology, the Continuation Institute was not engaged in development. Instead, it was dedicated to extinguishing all kinds of technology that would cause bad consequences. Even if it could not be extinguished, it must be blocked. Even if it could not be blocked, the entire area must be thoroughly cleaned. For many people, this department dedicated to maintaining the balance of the present realm and the border was too mysterious. It was so mysterious that 90% of the staff who worked for it had never entered its headquarters. If one wanted to get in touch with the staff at the headquarters, they must use a special network port and an AI that could completely isolate the mimetic virus. Just like now, after about half an hour of waiting, the phantom of the AI suddenly disappeared, and it was replaced by a thin man. He seemed to be quite young, but it was hard to tell. He was sitting on a chair in front of a window. Outside the window was the vast ocean, but the scenery inside the window was not like a luxurious and elegant resort hotel. Instead, it was as monotonous and serious as a sterile operating laboratory. Strictly speaking, this was indeed a laboratory. Everything, including the endless ocean inside and outside the room, was the experimental territory of Shah, the creator who specialized in marine ecology. May, what's the matter? He seemed to have just returned. He took a sip of coffee and joked, "Since you graduated from the ivory tower, you haven't taken the initiative to contact me, your mentor. Is there something wrong with this year's ocean current operation?" "Teacher, my work is flawless. Please don't question my professionalism," Li Mei said seriously. "It's not my work that went wrong, it's my daughter. If I'm not mistaken, you should be involved in this witch's night, right?" "Ah, yes, but I'm only responsible for providing technical support. The main operation and responsibility are done by a few other people." Shah shrugged indifferently. Although in principle, it must be kept confidential, such an insignificant matter would not make a creator lie to his student. Soon, in the report submitted by the AI, he saw the content about Fu Yi. He was stunned for a moment, and then he laughed and gloated. "It's the fault of Niflheim. Ha 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 ha. This is the first time I've seen that guy with a straight face encounter such a problem. Ha ha ha. And no matter what, this old friend of his was really too unlucky. Because of two interfering factors, when a witch's night was launched, the database introduced by the invitation letter had an unexpected sequence change. Therefore, under certain special circumstances, the proportion of genetic factors in the DNA test would be too high, leading to a slight possibility of identification errors. In other words, it may cause confusion in the identity of relatives within the same generation. How tragic! How unlucky must he be to step on such a trivial landmine on the second to last day before the special honor of 0 mistakes in 50 years. No wonder he ignored me during the meeting. I took out my collection of lame jokes, and he rolled his eyes at me. So that's why. Ha ha ha. Shah laughed so hard that tears almost flowed out his eyes. "Thank you, May. I'll keep this report well. No, I'm going to add 10 points to your year-end evaluation. This report will definitely add a lot of joy to tomorrow's lunch meeting." Li Mei already had a deep understanding of this tutor's unpredictable and unreliable personality. But seeing his reaction, Li Mei heaved a sigh of relief. "Teacher, since you said so, are you willing to help me? Of course, it's rare for a student to ask me for help. Isn't this the sense of accomplishment of being a teacher?" Shah smiled slightly. "It just so happens that I've been very free recently." But after he finished speaking, his expression became solemn, and his eyes became serious. "Pinocchio, grant Li Mei temporary level 3 cognitive authority, temporarily remove the information shield, and perform cognitive interference on other unrelated persons." What he was about to say next would be a real secret. On the screen, the phantom of the AI, Pinocchio, flashed by. In an instant, the room where the terminal was located was physically isolated, separated from the outside, and the cognitive interference had already taken effect. The language had been disconnected and dislocated. Whatever Shah said next, except for Li Mei, even if others were eavesdropping and recording, they would only hear some garbled syllables and the warning sound unique to the Continuation Academy's secrets. Only with such a degree of intelligence operation could it ensure that the world of ordinary people was isolated from threats outside the present world, and the secrets would always be kept in the hands of those who were qualified and able to accept them. Seeing Shah's serious expression, Li Mei's heart, which had just been relieved, was in her throat again. "What's going on? Is it a problem with the witch's night?" Shah nodded, pulled up the records of Pinocchio's current air, and directly transmitted them to Li Mei's terminal, forming a huge and detailed light screen record. In the countless complicated observation records, Li Mei's scholar intuition was keenly aware that something was wrong at first glance. "The internal depth index is changing." "Yes," Shah nodded. "Although it is normal for a similar environment to appear in the witch's night, The computing department has come up with a preliminary guess through the analysis of the index and spectrum. I'm afraid this senior of mine isn't all out of kindness. Li Mei was stunned, because the preliminary internal report of the Continuation Academy had appeared in front of Li Mei's eyes. Li Mei did not have time to read it line by line. She flipped directly to the final conclusion, then frowned when she saw the words marked in red. Abyssal evolution theory, Doomsday, food chain, rancher, destructive factor. The research of the Witch's Night was actually related to the existence of the element of destruction, and it was the rancher himself who had the most terrifying impact on the present world. The so-called destructive factor itself represented a possibility of the present world being destroyed. In other words, if a certain condition was met, it would inevitably cause the present world to be destroyed, regardless of whether it was strong or weak. And what the rancher himself represented was the cycle of the deformed food chain. As long as the phenomenon of the strong preying on the weak existed in this world, it would never die out. Like a stubborn disease and cancer, it parasitized the present world, pervasive. Over the years, there had been countless scholars who had carelessly frozen, brainwashed, and deformed the rancher itself. Even if it was the creator, could she be 100% sure that she would not be affected by hell? No one dared to talk nonsense. Otherwise, where did the golden dawn come from? On the bright side, maybe this creator is engaged in ecological research related to the rancher, Shah comforted. Shaq comforted him. Besides, with the protection of the Astronomy Society, we can forcibly pull her out when necessary. Well, that guy Niffenheim will definitely help. After all, this was caused by his mistake at work. With the two creators guaranteeing Fu Yi's safety, Li Mei heaved a sigh of relief. The excitement on her face slowly faded, and she became pale as if she had been ill for a long time. Other than that, let me see. According to the reports of the clearers and the observation team, most of the explorers should have a considerable degree of growth inside and are about to complete the preparation stage. Shah scratched his chin, then glanced at the clock. He used the time ratio formula in the report to do a brief calculation in his mind. Then he nodded. She should be able to use the remains in about a few minutes. At that time, according to the internal laws of the Witch's Night, her avatar will transform according to her own wishes and the lineage it belongs to, and the lineage will also support her. The others should have their own avatars by now. I haven't chosen one yet. If she doesn't mind, I can at least provide her with some advice and help when she advances. After a pause, he smiled helplessly. But she shouldn't like creatures like octopuses or sea monsters, right? It couldn't be helped. After all, the records of marine creatures were all ugly creatures. A crisp snap of fingers sounded. In Shah's laboratory, countless instruments sank into the ground. Then, a huge instrument rose from the floor. Countless cables were connected to each other, forming a huge steel chair behind Shah. Then a mask slowly fell down. A special passage for spirits to enter had been prepared for Shah. Wait a moment. I'll be back soon. Shah put on the mask, and his consciousness sneaked into the framework of the Witch's Night through the huge network of source substances. Then, he quickly returned from the Witch's Night. He took off the mask, opened his eyes, and looked at Li Mei with a strange expression. Did you find other creators? No. Li Mei shook his head blankly. Then, he saw Shah lowering his head to operate the instrument in his hand. Then he frowned. The four creators in charge of the project in the Continuation Institute didn't do anything to her. Strange. Could it be the Dongxia lineage? What's the matter? Li Mei asked anxiously. Is there a problem? Ahem. To be exact, there's no problem at all. Shah pondered for a moment, then said seriously, Your daughter eats well, sleeps well, and has a much more normal psychological index than the average person. She's even very happy. Also, her level isn't low. There's even a rather upright, tough, and capable military officer who volunteered to be her teammate and provide her with protection. But he paused, and his expression became more and more strange. Another creator actually chose her in advance? Chapter 326. Huaishir felt that his good brother was about to die. Ever since they had taken possession of that bone, they'd spent almost an entire day using the map function to kill monsters on the grassy plains and had finally reached level 10. They had reached the standard for using the bone. But considering that they had no defensive abilities during evolution, the other person needed to be nearby while one person was evolving. To ensure their safety, Huaishir let Fu Yi, who was slightly weaker in combat, advance first, then wait for her to finish before protecting him. Unexpectedly, after Fu Yi found the thumb-sized golden bone, she hugged it and didn't move. She froze in place. She didn't say anything, and she didn't even pant. Huaishir couldn't feel her pulse as a dog, so he could only lean over to listen to her heartbeat, and then he grimaced in pain. He couldn't even hear her heartbeat. Instead, he discovered an even worse situation. Not only was his good brother dead, but she was also petrified. He bit down on the wooden stick and tapped it twice. Bang! If it weren't for the fact that the origin substance fluctuations were still very stable, he would have suspected that Fu Yi was already dead. What was going on? He crouched on the ground, looking at Fu Yi's corpse in front of him with a confused expression. He raised his paw, hesitating whether or not he should give her a heart massage. But where was the hedgehog's heart? He began to think. Following that momentary daze, Fu Yi seemed to have arrived in a void of darkness. The glorious golden skeleton floated in front of her, releasing a brilliant light. Bit by bit, it merged into the body of her hedgehog. But then it stopped abruptly. It was as if the network had crashed while playing an exciting cinematic. Immediately afterwards, a hand reached out from the darkness and gently plucked the golden bone. The darkness changed. Fu Yi felt her vision blur, and then she began to rapidly rise, breaking through the darkness. She even shook off the hedgehog shell that she had just gotten used to and returned to her original appearance. She landed on a soft sofa. It seemed to be a rather spacious study. The sunlight outside the window shone into the room, illuminating the large dinosaur fossil placed in the middle of the study. In addition to the old smell of ancient books, the air was filled with the faint fragrance of flowers. In the middle of the high wall that was filled with countless books, there were a few lush green plants that looked full of vitality. A teacup appeared in Fu Yi's hand, and the fragrance of the tea rose slowly with the smoke, blurring her vision. She blinked hard and looked around blankly. Then she saw the woman sitting in the chair opposite her. She seemed to be very old. Her hair was white, but she didn't have the usual gentleness of an elderly person. Her eyes behind the metal glasses were sharp and firm. It looked out of place in this study. There was a faint, earthy fragrance on the old man's body, and what he was wearing was not soft and comfortable silk, but a denim jacket that was more like a sturdy canvas. There were some traces of mud on the bottom of his pants, and his leather boots were old, but still sturdy and durable. She didn't have the stooped posture of old age. Her body was still broad, and her bones were strong. Moreover, her well-proportioned muscles didn't loosen along with her skin. A kind of valiant and capable aura came from her. It was as if a legendary explorer had suddenly appeared in front of him. Those who saw her would instinctively associate her with words such as adventure, exploration, and so on. After noticing Fu Yi's sluggishness, the old female creator was stunned for a moment. She immediately looked down at herself and shook her head. Sorry, old habits are hard to change. I should have changed my clothes first. So handsome. Fu Yi blurted out in a daze. She immediately realized her gaffe and coughed awkwardly. She put down the teacup and asked politely, "Excuse me, are you from the Astronomy Society?" I guess you can say that." The old man thought for a moment, showed an ambiguous smile, and carefully looked at Fu Yi. "There are no laws in the soul, and no stigmata. How rare. I didn't expect there to be an ordinary person among the explorers of the Continuation Academy. Why, that group of secrecy fanatics now know how to relax the standards. To be honest, you probably misunderstood something. I actually snuck in." Although she didn't know much about the Astronomy Society, Fu Yi at least understood that it was not a good thing to hide in front of this big shot who could pull her out with a wave of his hand. At least, she had to make things clear to avoid any misunderstandings. Is that so? I think I understand. She seemed to have thought of something and suddenly narrowed her eyes. So, you can't represent the Astronomy Society nor the Doomsday genealogy? Fu Yi was stunned for a moment. Although she felt something was wrong, she still nodded honestly. Very well. The old man happily snapped his fingers and asked, according to the internal rules of this Night of the Witch, the ascendant will be affected by the genealogy when they transform, and the scholar will integrate into their own discipline when they advance. As an ordinary person, you are actually an exception to the rules. In this case, you have two choices. She paused for a moment and said seriously, first, withdraw from this exploration and safely return to your peaceful life. Saying goodbye to danger is not something to be ashamed of, and it is not funny as an ordinary person. Whether it is the Astronomy Society, the major genealogies, or even the ascendants themselves, the meaning of existence is to protect ordinary people like you and the world you live in. You don't have to feel ashamed. Fu Yi thought for a moment and asked directly, what's the second choice? That is to find a creator to adjust and arrange the next evolution direction for you. The old man smiled and pointed at himself. For example, wait a minute. It seems that another creator is also very interested in you. Unfortunately, I have already chosen. She suddenly waved her hand as if she was shaking off something. Then, she sat on the sofa and quietly waited for Fu Yi's choice. Okay. Fu Yi accepted this reality faster than she expected and nodded her head without hesitation. The old man was slightly surprised. So straightforward. Isn't this the cheat often mentioned in novels? Fu Yi was looking forward to it. I also have a master, a grandmother. Is the literature of the modern realm too developed, or are all the girls in the modern realm so careless? The old man was stunned for a long time. Then, he shook his head and laughed self-deprecatingly. He took out the golden remains from his pocket and put it on the table. Then, let's get back to business. I have stopped your transformation. There are still loopholes in the Astronomy Society's automatic allocation principle. You are not suitable for the gold of transformation. She pondered and suddenly asked, agate, amber, or quartz, which one do you prefer? Fu Yi hesitated for a moment, and suddenly thought of Huai Shi's remains. He asked tentatively, obsidian? The old man shook his head. Obsidian, which represents matter, is the least suitable for you. On the contrary, you seem to be more suitable for the other extreme. Glass is more suitable. She hesitated for a moment, reached out, and knocked on the remains on the table. In an instant, the bright gold faded, and the remains changed. In the end, it was as if there was nothing left on the spot. If it was not for the faint reflection of the sunlight outside the window, Fu Yi would not have been able to determine what was there. This is the opposite of the ever-changing gold, the eternal glass, the old man explained. The golden remains strengthen the use of your origin substance, but you don't have any talent or performance in this area. It is far less suitable for you than the glass that emphasizes the qualitative change of the body. She was silent for a moment and said seriously, I want to remind you that the transformation of the glass remains may have a considerable impact on your own strength. Even if there is a creator who adjusts the transformation and evolution method for you, you will still fall behind the progress of others for a long time. In the early and middle stages, it is too easy to die prematurely. Fu Yi waved her hand calmly. I have a good brother to guide me. The old man was puzzled. He squinted his eyes and looked at something carefully. Soon, a happy smile appeared on his face. It is indeed a very good friend. He thinks you are dead and is now rubbing his nose against you. You are pricked. I am afraid you have to hurry up. He has already begun to think about how to give you mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and chest compressions. A dog giving first aid to a hedgehog. I can't take it anymore. Fu Yi's expression became more and more awkward. With great difficulty, the old man finally stopped laughing. He wiped his tears and asked seriously, Then are you ready? Yes. Fu Yi nodded. After hesitating for a moment, she asked, "But there's one more question, ask. Why are you helping me?" Fu, he asked curiously. "To be honest, I know myself very well. I have no value and no talent. The possibility of me becoming a sender is not high, and I do not have the ability to be a scholar. It is not a big deal to leave such a person alone. To be honest, I was originally a little worried that this action was too rash, but there are two reasons." The old man raised two fingers and said seriously, "First, I have an immature idea, and you are the most suitable one. Yes, and the second?" The second, the old man paused for a moment and kept her in suspense. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a proud smile from the bottom of his heart. "Because you praised me for being very handsome." Then, in the instant that Fu Yi was stunned, this very handsome old woman waved her hand. She sank back into the darkness. Then, she saw the glass of nothingness burst out with resplendent light and engulfed her. She fell into a deep sleep. She woke up from her dream. Then, she opened her eyes and saw Huaishur in front of her with a nervous expression. "Fu Yi, bad news." He opened his eyes wide in panic. "You are shedding hair." "Huh?" Fu Yi jumped up from the ground and looked at her body blankly. Then she saw the spikes on her body fall off one by one, like melons falling off when ripe without any pain. Then her bones began to rapidly change, proliferate, and grow. Visible to the naked eye, her body began to rapidly and subtly change. In the blink of an eye, as the remains disappeared, she welcomed her own transformation. In the blink of an eye, the transformation from the inside out was complete. She raised her head nervously and looked at Huaishur. "How am I now?" Huaishur scrutinized Fu Yi in front of him, whose appearance had changed greatly. No, even her species was no longer a hedgehog. After thinking seriously for a moment, he said solemnly, "You have grown longer." In front of the husky, in the reflection of its ice-blue eyes, a lonely, weak, and helpless stoat fell into a daze. Chapter 3:27. 10 minutes later, Fu Yi, who was so frightened by Huaishur that she almost deleted her account, finally saw her own appearance in the reflection of the lake and breathed a sigh of relief. Then, she was so angry that she didn't want to talk to Huaishur anymore. She would never be able to find the main point when talking to this bastard. She would only explode with anger, especially when she opened her eyes and found that there were two electric eels beside her. Huaishur's dog paw was thinking about how to give her an electroconvulsive cardiopulmonary resuscitation. "Can't you think of something more reasonable?" The little stoat poked Huaishur's dog nose angrily. "Did you become a husky or show your original form?" "Aren't I panicking?" "Panicking." Huaishur smiled flatteringly, waved his paw, and threw the two eyesore electric eels into the lake. He coughed twice and forcibly changed the topic. "After using the remains, are there any changes? Except for the missing one and the changed one." Cough, cough. Under Fu Yi's cold stare, he finally swallowed the words "missing hair" and "growing." After being interrupted by this bastard for a long time, Fu Yi finally remembered that she didn't remember to see what changes had happened during this transformation. Compared to Huaishur, who didn't even have a monthly card, the GM account was simple and straightforward. After the two plugins analyzed it, they immediately gave the results. First of all, the original illusion has been upgraded. Fu Yi's little round ears trembled twice, and her body quickly became hazy. Then, it reached the point where it completely refracted light and became completely invisible. After integrating the original haziness, it can also change into other ferocious beasts and scenes, but they don't have much lethality. The radius is about 10 meters or so, from a single entity to a group, and the range had increased so much. It could be said that there was a qualitative change. And there's a new talent. Fu Yi raised her little black tail and shook it. Her whole body seemed to be supported by an invisible disc, slowly rising from the ground. It was as if she was flying, free in the city in the sky. Psychokinesis. Wow, bro. Huaishur's eyes lit up, and he raised his claws impatiently, Give me one too. I want to fly too. The stoat shook his head in pity. The upper limit of what this talent can lift is my weight. Don't even think about it. It's hopeless. Then, can't you eat more? Pa. There was a whistling sound as something brushed past the tip of Huaishi's nose and embedded itself deeply into the rock behind him. It was like a sniper rifle, and even the soil was charred black by the terrifying speed at which it had traveled. Under Huaishi's astonished gaze, one of Fu Yi's spikes slowly flew out of the hole and returned to Fu Yi's side. Around her, hundreds of spikes with metallic luster slowly circled around her, like the punk backlight of a postmodern Buddha statue. This skill is actually used like this. The stoat tilted its head, and a smile appeared on its harmless and cute face. Do you want to try? Oh my, a flying sword. The husky swallowed his saliva and shook his head frantically. Illusions, psychokinesis, and the 5 ghosts move. Sister, are you sure you're not some yellow immortal? He tilted his head and looked at Fu Yi in the air. Suddenly, his brain went haywire again. He brought his nose closer and asked curiously, "Wait a minute, generally speaking, aren't all mustelids stinky? You don't seem to." As he spoke, he was speechless under Fu Yi's silent gaze. Are you done? Cough, cough. I'm done. Thus, countless spikes flew into the air, aimed at Huaishi's dumbfounded dog face, and burst out with a girl's roar. Then died. In fact, Fu Yi was quite kind. She only wanted half of his dog life. And she also took the spikes and poked his dog face until it was swollen. Based on the principle that the injuries would be healed after the transformation, Fu Yi planned to break 2 more dog legs. Later, she regretfully gave up when Huaishi shamelessly hugged her legs and begged for mercy. Okay, it's your turn. Sitting on a leaf, the white weasel hovered in midair with its paws crossed in front of its chest. It looked down at the cowering Huaishi and said, "Don't be a coward. Let's see what you'll turn into. What the hell? God knows what the hell I'll become." Huaishi raised his head and looked at the obsidian skeleton in front of him. No matter how many times he saw it, he couldn't help but be dumbfounded and in disbelief. Just under the grass washed out by the rain, the dark skeleton revealed a rock-like texture, protruding obliquely toward the sky. It looked like some kind of cylindrical stone, and it was more than half the size of Huaishi now. After 10 evolutions, Huaishi's pure body size, quality, and ability had reached the subversion of a canine creature. Fortunately, it was not the reappearance realm. No matter who saw a husky half the size of a car, they would be afraid. Now, not to mention tearing down the house, Huaishi was confident that he could even dig out the cement blocks in the foundation in 10 minutes. With Fu Yi's transformed body, he could squeeze an entire intensive class on top of her head. However, even though he was so huge, when he sat in front of the skeleton, he couldn't say that he was bigger than it. Moreover, the section in front of him was only a scale that was exposed from the soil. A section of phalanx. Yesterday, when Huaishi had the husky disease and began to habitually dig holes, he actually dug out a rib bone 2 meters below the ground dozens of meters away. After the system's verification, these 2 black rocks were just 2 parts of the same skeleton exposed on the ground. It was an out-and-out behemoth. Huaishi couldn't imagine how huge this skeleton was when it was still alive. When Huaishi finally reached level 10 and touched the skeleton again, this time there was no prompt that the conditions were insufficient. Obsidian skeleton detected. Do you want to start transformation? Warning, transformation cannot be reversed. The direction of evolution is even more uncontrollable. No matter how meticulous the design is, there's a risk of failure in the end. Risk of failure. These words are not only bigger than the others, but also marked in blood red. The warning must be serious. But what did this have to do with Huaishi the husky? It sounded like he would be afraid. The dog raised its paw and slapped down. Confirm. Let me give you the job. He still had time to look back and smile at Fu Yi in the air. Then he saw Fu Yi's shocked expression, her hair standing on end in fear. The ground shook with a roar. The earth cracked, as if a monster under the 9th heaven had awakened. It opened its eyes and drove its broken limbs to crawl out of the grave. After thousands of years, it was exposed to the air again. The skeleton was awe-inspiring, and blood-red flames rose. The burning behemoth opened its mouth and swallowed the husky in an instant. The mountain-like hollow skeleton collapsed and shrank inwards, forming a huge, square black cube in an instant. There was not a single crack on the black stone cube. Countless intricate and complicated patterns appeared on it, flashing with lightning from time to time. There was no trace of Huaishur anymore. The transformation had begun. Fu Yi's jaw dropped to the ground in shock at such a terrifying scene. A new doubt appeared in her little mind. Wait a minute, which one of us is cheating? Sample matching complete. Detection complete. Celestial genealogy, Heaven's Inquisition Road, type Omega. Welcome, Your Excellency. Connecting to Utopia. Matching error. No response. Utopia's host is silent. Connecting to the Ivory Tower. Matching error. No supreme terminal detected. Connecting to the observatory. Connection failed. Detected the 3 wise men system. Connecting. The Creator DM has rejected your transformation request. The Creator ST has rejected your transformation request. The Creator KP has accepted your transformation request. The Creator KP has rejected your transformation request. The Creator Gila has accepted your transformation request. In a trance, Huaishur felt that there was a vague voice in his consciousness, but he could not hear it clearly. It was as if he had fallen into a deep sleep, full of fatigue and sleepiness. When he tried to open his eyes, he could only see a white light. He could not see anything clearly. There seemed to be a voice exclaiming in surprise. Leave it to me? But what are you afraid of? Isn't it just a theory of evolution topic? A frivolous and annoying voice sounded. It's super easy. Isn't that what you do? Just do it casually. Even if you accidentally kill him, can this little brat blame you? But I was originally researching the regeneration of cell telomeres. It's completely different from the theory of evolution. The fearful and familiar voice said, moreover, my current specialty is recording operations and management. It's not suitable at all. Sigh, it's a pity that classic of mountains and seas and records of strange things have disappeared. Wait a moment, I'll find something. A moment later, the annoying voice sounded again. Here, take these records. As the record keeper of the heavenly kingdom, you don't need to know so much. Just put the appropriate books on the appropriate shelves. You can relax a little and just follow this. The Wonderful Nature, Monster Manual, Jaws, Godzilla. There was a sound of flipping, and the voice became more and more confused. Why is there a 6th edition COC Monster Manual? Is it really okay to do this? Of course it's okay. Boys like to cry after receiving this. The annoying voice became more and more cheerful. Just do this first, then do this. How is it? Very simple, right? With a swoosh, a display box suddenly jumped out from Huaishur's consciousness. Do you choose to evolve into a legendary species, Shugus? Huaishur? Hundreds of thousands of question marks rose from his consciousness, one after another. What the hell? Before he could react, he heard a strange woman's angry rebuke. KP, if you continue to mess around, all the records this year will be handed over to you to sort out. The display box suddenly disappeared, as if it was escaping in a hurry. It slipped away. As KP disappeared, the older woman's tone became gentle. Just do it, Lily. Just treat it as a thesis. Didn't you read a lot of records before the topic of the Abyss evolution theory? Celestial genealogy is originally very adaptable to hell creatures, so you don't have to worry about rejection. What's more, that bastard has been interrupting for so long, you should already have a plan in mind, right? More or less, there's still some details that I'm not sure about. I want to consult you and the DM teacher. Do you want to start from the base and sequence chain? Mr. KP told me that I don't need to focus on the details, so I plan to determine the final main axis and prototype first. Oh, sure enough, a working girl is the cutest. Do you have an idea? How about all-destroying evil dragon? Not a bad idea. What's the specific core? Use the old overlord here. How about that? What about the inside? The ancient blood of greed. Performance? Just like how Niholt destroyed the world tree, devouring everything. Very good. The older woman asked approvingly. So, have you thought a name for this collection of works you've compiled? After a short moment of thought, her slender fingers held a pen and wrote a story about the evil dragon on the title page. A story about an invincible monster. Bichimos. At that moment, a deeper sense of drowsiness swallowed Huaishur. He closed his eyes, like an embryo curled up in amniotic fluid, feeling an unprecedented arrival. His body seemed to be slowly dissolving, but a new body was being reconstructed from it, starting from the internal organs to the nerves, and then to the muscles and the huge bones that supported it all. It was like sitting in the audience, quietly watching all of this without any thoughts, quiet and serene, until the heart in his chest suddenly shook. It jumped. He bent his body as if he had been electrocuted, opened his eyes in the darkness, breathed, and swallowed the amniotic fluid. It was too dark. Where was this? DC World? Before he could make this joke in his mind, which had become an old joke, he felt the brutality of the beast emerging from the deepest part of his consciousness. It was unruly, majestic, and ferocious. He roared, roaring in this long suffocation. He struggled with all his might. The new muscles stretched on the bones, bursting with terrifying power. He straightened his body and suddenly broke free of his body. With a roar of the boulder breaking, he broke out of the shell and stood under the mournful pale moonlight. He felt the wind blowing from afar. Involuntarily, he roared at the sky. The hissing sound rose to the sky and spread in all directions with the hurricane. It was as if the earth was faintly trembling, and countless creatures fled in panic. Insufferably arrogant. When he finally calmed down, he saw Fu-Yi floating in the air in front of him, looking at him happily, gloating. Oh, bro, her claws pointed at Huaishur's body. You're bald. Chapter 328. He was bald. He was really bald. Not even a strand of hair. 10 minutes later, Huaishur, who was sitting by the lake, raised his claws and scratched his face. He felt a burst of sparks and the ear-piercing sound. A small stone was thrown into the lake, creating layers of ripples. In an instant, the overly large reflection blurred. It became bigger again. Now Huaishur's body was bigger than before. If it was still barely comparable to the size of a car, it was now as big as an ambulance. The once elegant hair had disappeared without a trace. Instead, it was replaced by hard scales and carapace with bluish-gray mixed with wisps of bright yellow. Many body tissues had been covered by sharp and hard chitin tissue, including his 4 claws. Even his chin had a sharp angle, like a sharp blade, so sharp that it could stab people to death. There was not a trace of skin on his body that was exposed. When he opened his mouth, 2 rows of hard and sharp teeth were exposed under the sharp carapace. They rubbed against each other, and sparks flew. Even if Fu-Yi used all her strength to shoot out spikes, she could not break Huaishur's thick carapace and scales. Huaishur could conclude that even among the obsidian bones, which were known for their substance, there was no one as hard as him. And it was not just that. Whether it was muscle strength, physical strength, or even explosive power and speed, it had all entered the category of monsters. It was no longer comparable to the husky of the past. Should be called a wolf or a dragon. If he didn't lean on either side, he would be neither. But it seemed to be a little bit of both. The only problem was that he still didn't seem to have any cool skills to show off. It seemed that only his calmness had improved a little. Other than that, he was hungry. Extremely hungry. Unbearable hunger. He was so hungry that when he explained his changes to Fu-Yi, he couldn't help but lower his head and pull a few weeds from the lake to eat. As he ate, he felt that the taste was not bad. It was sweet and delicious. More so, under Fu-Yi's dull gaze, the giant wolf beast bent down and gnawed on the lawn. It directly pulled the roots from the ground, swallowed them, chewed twice, and swallowed. Then he found that the taste of soil seemed to be not bad, kind of like an Oreo. He smelled it and found that it smelled good. Yes, it was definitely edible. Then he began to eat the soil in big mouthfuls. From time to time, there would be small stones rubbing against his teeth, bursting into sparks. Hey, are you okay? Fu Yi was stunned. Did something happen during the metamorphosis? It's nothing. It's just that nutrition. Yes, nutrition. In the pit, Huaisher focused on eating the soil and answered with a huff. In just a few minutes, he had already dug a huge hole in the ground and eaten at least a ton of soil. However, his stomach didn't swell at all. He didn't even fart. Soon, Huaisher, who was still hungry, raised his head from the huge pit that was about to bury him. He looked around and asked, "Is there anything else to eat?" Fu Yi subconsciously flew higher, afraid that her good brother would accidentally add food to her. Then, she raised her claws and pointed at the lake not far away. Huaisher's eyes lit up, and he suddenly jumped. Then he dug too deep and didn't jump up. He jumped and crawled forward, leaving a deep pit in the ground. He pounced straight into the lake and opened his mouth to look for small fish and prawns. He drank some water while he was at it. He was so thirsty. It's cool. Huaisher's fangs suddenly pounced down and bit a stupid fish that was as big as a table. He raised his head and looked at the stoat in the air. He asked vaguely, "Do you want to come down? There are so many fish down there. There seems to be..." Boom! A huge tentacle suddenly rose from the deepest part of the lake and emerged from the water. It swept across and grabbed one of Huaisher's legs, pulling it fiercely. Plop! The huge wolf beast disappeared from the lake. In midair, Fu Yi was dumbfounded. The three questions in life appeared in her mind. What the hell? What was going on? What should she do? Wait, was there a sea monster hiding in this lake? What should she do if Huaisher was pulled down? She didn't seem to have any water combat ability. She opened the map and carefully chased Huaisher's ID down. She found that the depth kept falling and only stopped when he was almost out of the edge of the map. Then, the ups and downs began to be unstable. It seemed to be struggling violently. The fierce battle at the bottom of the lake set off surging undercurrents, and even layers of fine waves were stirred up on the surface of the lake. Looking down from the sky, through the constantly changing black shadow, one could vaguely see the fierce battle. However, Fu Yi felt that Huaisher's struggle seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. He was gradually suffocating in the deep lake. In the end, a terrifying light suddenly erupted from the dark bottom of the lake. Then, a violent current rose. After breaking through the restraints of the lake, it soared into the sky with a roar and splashed in all directions. Fu Yi's face was drenched in water, and she was stunned in place. What was going on? Someone was blowing up fish? Then, among the blood that floated up, a proud husk-like wolf emerged from the water with a large tentacle in its mouth. When it returned to the shore, it shook its body and shook off the water. I almost forgot I still have my own skills. Huaisher licked the burn marks on his carapace caused by the alchemy bomb. He lowered his head and tasted the fruits of his labor. The taste was quite good and the texture was excellent. He was fine with the protection of his thick carapace, but the giant octopus at the bottom of the lake was probably in a miserable state. Even if it didn't die on the spot, it probably wouldn't live for long. Just now, he had a flash of inspiration and finally remembered that he still had soul power that he could use. He made a super large alchemy bomb and found that as his carapace grew larger, the total amount of origin substance also increased by a terrifying amount. It was completely several times more than before, and even the yield of the alchemy bomb was much more exaggerated. The bomb was stuffed into the mouth of the octopus. In an instant, flowers bloomed on the inside and fragrance on the outside. The burnt smell couldn't be stopped. When Huaisher finished eating the tentacle and was still licking his teeth, he saw the giant octopus slowly float up from the lake behind him. Its head capsule was broken and completely burnt. It was completely dead. But Huaisher didn't see any changes in his experience progress bar. To be exact, until now. After he transformed, he found that the experience progress bar was gone. After asking Fu Yi, he found that she was the same. It was as if the novice period of the cruel game had ended. From now on, everything depended on the explorers themselves. Huaisher thought that there was no need to rush this matter. He ran into the lake and pulled back the remaining giant octopus and continued to eat. Unfortunately, there was no cumin. Otherwise, the The children next door would be crying. As he ate, he looked up at the sky blankly. Let's eat together, Fu-Yi. Aren't you hungry? No, you can eat alone. The stoat's ears twitched, and it shrank back a little. Just now, when Huaishur was about to eat half full, her shield suddenly activated on its own, and the system plug-in began to crazily pop out warnings. A strange filter suddenly popped out and loaded. After loading, when she looked at Huaishur again, she saw the ferocious and terrifying bones under the huge body. Then the analyzer interface popped up, telling her that as Huaishur ate the soil crazily, the metal content of its bones was rising sharply. Soon, under the layer of bones, about the position of the stomach, there was a layer of pale green light that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. Dozens of meters away, it still brought about a hallucinatory burning sensation. Fu-Yi didn't understand the other messy data and nouns, but she seemed to have seen the word radiation somewhere. Fu-Yi could feel a change in the cells of her body. Then, she ignored this layer of faint, strange light. It was like a crystal, letting it pass through her body without any effect. No matter what, she was sure that when Huaishur ate, it was definitely not something good. The taste is pretty good. You don't have the luck to eat it. Huaishur shook his head, sighed twice, and continued to eat. As he ate, he remembered, speaking of which, I have a dish of squid that is pretty good. It even won a prize in a professional food competition. How about I cook it for you next time? Forget it, Fu-Yi angrily refused. Even if she used her tail to think, she felt that Huaishur would not be able to produce anything good. In the end, Huaishur managed to eat all of the giant octopuses that were larger than her in tonnage. It took a full 2 hours, and the hunger since the transformation finally subsided temporarily. He yawned, feeling the itchiness and sleepiness in his bone marrow. He opened his mouth to the sky and was about to say something, but the bloating in his stomach unexpectedly spurted out a mouthful of fire. He was so scared that he quickly shut up. He was sleepy when he was full. After he greeted Fu-Yi, he simply lay on the ground, curled up into a ball, and fell asleep. When he moved, his scales rubbed against each other, bursting out a dazzling fire. After a long time, when the strange green light on his body dissipated, Fu-Yi fell from the sky with lingering fear and habitually returned to her special bed. Before she sat down, she jumped up from the heat. It was as if she was sitting on a stove. Huaishur's head was so hot that it was almost burning red. The skin under the scales was faintly red, like flowing hot lava. In the deep sleep, Huaishur's body at this moment began to grow again. Countless muscles under the scales pulsed irregularly, becoming thicker and stronger, and more growth gathered in the bones. With a sharp sound like steel rubbing against each other, two sharp bone objects that were forked like antlers grew out of Huaishur's forehead. The edges and corners were sharp. The moonlight shone on them, and there was a burst of coldness like steel. It wasn't until the second half of the night that the high fever gradually subsided. Fu-Yi tilted her head and looked at the two sharp horns that occupied her special bed. The more she looked, the angrier she became. She angrily kicked the roots twice. Then she straightened her body and paced around Huaishur's body. After circling a flat position near his neck, she lay down and curled up, falling into a deep sleep. In the long night, there was a faint singing sound in the distance. Chapter 329. He seemed to hear someone singing, but the song was not clear, distant and vague, full of sadness and sadness. He could not tell whether it was humming or some kind of ancient language, but it made people feel cold. It evoked the fear hidden in the depths of Huaishur's blood. Once again, he recalled the terrible scene of the sky falling and the earth cracking, and the terrible scene of all things being buried in thunder and fire. That was a disaster. The end of the disaster. The end of all things was coming, and everything would be destroyed. Just as the Holy Spirit and the prophets said, everything in the world would be turned into ashes in the lava and fire. Destruction was coming. Huaishur, destruction was coming, following your footsteps, hiding in the shadow behind you, step by step, not relaxing for a moment. When Huaishur opened his eyes, it was already dawn. Under the tyrannical sunlight, All things dried up, but the coldness in his bone marrow still did not dissipate. If he was a human, he would probably be sweating. Did you hear it too? Fu, he looked at him calmly. I heard someone screaming for the whole night. He even shouted for me to run away. Huaishir was silent for a moment and whispered, I heard someone singing, but the meaning should be similar to yours. Then what should we do? Fu, he was at a loss. What else can we do? Run, Fu. Huaishir got up from the ground, looked around, and finally noticed a trace of something wrong. Today's sun was too hot. Even Huaishir's body now felt a trace of heat. And Fu, he had already made a light, refracting illusion layer to cover the top of her head. The lake next to them had become smaller, and steam was rising, as if they were in a sauna room. Drink water first. Huaishir walked to the lake, lowered his head, and began a new round of drinking. Drink enough water, and then we'll go. As he swallowed, water vapor rose from under his scales, making his body feel slippery. Fu, he didn't know if it was sweat or something else, but she was able to analyze a part of the poisonous substance in it. He felt that the direction of this guy's evolution was becoming more and more strange. It could eat anything and digest anything. Moreover, it could expel toxins from the outside of its body just by drinking water. It didn't even need to use a smuff. Wouldn't that save a lot of trouble? Although she really wanted to complain in her heart, Fu, he still listened to Huaishir's instructions and drank a lot of water. She also used the shells of many plants and large nuts on the grassland to make water storage tanks. She strung them up with a straw rope and hung them on Huaishir's back as a water source. Although it was not enough for Huaishir to drink in one gulp, it was enough for her to drink for 2 or 3 days. Do you want to stock up on more meat? Huaishir asked. Are you going to hang sausages on your back? We don't have hands like that. Fu, he shook her head. Let's go first, but the question is, where are we going? Just walk in the opposite direction. Huaishir raised his head and looked at the snow mountain at the end of his sight, as well as the dark thunderclouds hidden behind the snow mountain. There were faint flashes of lightning dancing on the land that had already turned into hell, bringing down cruel whips. Time was limited, and they had to continue moving inward. If Huaishir guessed correctly, in the end, this piece of land would be reduced to the same extent, right? He took one last look, turned around, and walked toward the world outside the grassland. Behind him, a line of deep footprints was left on the grassland, extending to the end of the unknown land. The difficult trek lasted for at least 5 days. If Fu, he did not have a plug-in similar to a compass, Huaishir would have almost lost his way. This grassland was unexpectedly large, so large that Huaishir could not imagine it. Along the way, Huaishir found many traces of skeletons. Some of them were simply exposed on the ground for people to pick. There were gold, black iron, and even corals. But Huaishir did not see any skeletons that were as large as her own skeletons. So he simply ate them all. The texture was crispy, like roasted corn, and there was an intoxicating smell of pepper. Then, visible to the naked eye, his body grew 2 times larger. According to Fu Yi's examination, the metal content of his bones had increased again, and now it had reached 30%. And it seemed to be some kind of alloy that was directly secreted from the bone marrow. It was so unscientific. More importantly, under Huaishir's endless eating, the organs in his body seemed to be about to usher in a new transformation. In his throat, an organ like a food sac was developing. Perhaps this was the reason why Huaishir had been spitting sparks more and more frequently in the past 2 days. There's also a layer of dense, new structure growing between his skin and scales. The scales at the end of his long tail had all fallen off, and there was a bulge. These 2 days, he often felt a tingling sensation, which made Huaishir feel unusually uncomfortable. And the weather was getting hotter and hotter. It was so hot that Huaishir was flustered. Everything was steaming, and many grasslands had dried up, revealing the cracked yellow soil below. And water was so rare that it was as precious as a miracle. If it weren't for the fact that Huaishir could last for several days after drinking one meal, he would probably have died of thirst. And just yesterday, they finally met other explorers who had completed their transformation. Separated by a 2-meter wide stream, The two sides met unexpectedly. Well, Huaishir had already known from Fu Yi, but when they found an exaggerated giant beast next to the water source, the group of rats were obviously stunned. That group of rats were all explorers. That's right, all of them, and they were all the same explorer. Huaishir didn't understand how it evolved into this appearance, but this seemed to be the appearance they deliberately sought. The group of rats, old and young, male and female, had already begun to walk upright. They were already the size of a child, and their hands already had 10 fingers. They could use preliminary tools. However, those dozen or so stone spears and longbows were just a joke in front of Huaishir's body. Fortunately, Huaishir had just finished eating a mammoth and 2 open-air ores with a lot of minerals. He was barely 80% full and had no intention of fighting. Everyone was at peace. After drinking the water, they went on their separate ways. Since then, Huaishir hadn't seen any water source. There were animals everywhere that had fallen and become dried corpses, and the animals that survived became more and more ferocious and strange. If he wasn't careful, Huaishir would suffer a great loss at the hands of a bunch of parasites that burrowed into his stomach. He felt uncomfortable for a long time. Then the pile of parasites was digested in the radiation stomach acid. The terrifying drought and exposure lasted until the night of the 7th day. Suddenly, the sultry and suffocating hot wind disappeared. Instead, it was unbearable cold. An icy wind blew from the depths of the grassland. In an instant, it swept across the land and froze it. There were no clouds for thousands of miles. Amidst the dull rumbling of thunder, countless palm-sized snowflakes and hailstones fell from the sky. After one night, the terrifying cold had turned the depths of the grassland into a dangerous place. I'm afraid no one can survive in that place, right? Fu Yi raised her head and looked behind her. She couldn't help but shiver. Even she couldn't withstand the terrifying low temperature. She simply made a hanging basket and hung it around Huaishir's neck. Relying on Huaishir's furnace-like body temperature to warm herself, she shivered. What's going on? It's probably the end of the world. Huaishir calmly retracted her gaze and continued to trudge forward unhurriedly in the snow. Heavy hailstones constantly fell from the sky and smashed on his shell and scales, bursting out with the unique sonorous sound of metal. Above the clouds, a huge eagle suddenly broke through the clouds. Accompanied by a high-pitched eagle cry, it descended from the sky. Then it came to a sudden stop and stopped on a tree branch beside Huaishir. There are two? The giant eagle with bright golden feathers looked at the two stunned people. Which one of you is a friend from the Astronomy Association? Huaishir looked down at Fu Yi under his neck. Fu Yi understood and climbed out of the hanging basket and hid between the scales at the back of Huaishir's head. It's me. The ferocious wolf beast raised his head and asked indifferently, What's the matter? Let me see. It's indeed a first-class military officer. Amazing brother. Which department are you from? The golden eagle sighed. Looking at your body shape, you should have undergone the second transformation, right? Your survivability is really terrifying. I show here that he is a scholar from the Astronomy Association. His registered name is Color of Stars. Fu Yi whispered in his ear. Well, needless to say, it's another GM account. Huaishir curled his lips and asked straightforwardly, Brother, what's the matter? Do you want to go together? The golden eagle said in a friendly manner. The country of Fog Ahead is not a place for lone wolves. Several of our friends from the technical department have formed a team. Do you want to go together? Huaishir was a little tempted, but after thinking about it, he finally shook his head. No, I'm here to help a girl. Okay. The golden eagle was not surprised by this result. He just nodded and said, We have set up a camp about 90 kilometers east of here. Some of our friends who have evolved have begun to make tools. If you're interested, you can come to us at any time. We are all technical nerds and are really not good at fighting with people. If you're willing to come, you can make up for the shortcomings. After a pause, he reminded them, if you eat explorers, you can accumulate a lot of energy for transformation. If you travel alone, remember to be careful of those who deliberately hunt explorers. Also, there's a guy not far ahead who's out of control. Don't get entangled with him. He looked at the two of them meaningfully and spread his wings to fly away. Huaishur stared at his back enviously and ate lemons for a long time. You tell me, why don't I have wings? Can you at least have some common sense of aerodynamics? Fu Yi rolled her eyes. With your tonnage, other than a jet engine, what else can you carry? Isn't it just the vector jet of a fighter jet? I also had one. TSK, keep bragging. Tisk, forget it if you don't believe me. Huaishur continued to move forward. In the wind and snow, he finally saw the rampager mentioned by the Golden Eagle. He was stunned and gasped. Do you want to go around it? It's too late, Fu Yi sighed. At that moment, a ferocious killing intent emerged and chased after him. Chapter 330. In a white blizzard, a wriggling silhouette suddenly emerged. The huge fan-like wings spread out against the hurricane. The huge butterfly-like wings were full of holes and cracks. Only the two hideous black spots on the wings were still clear. It looked like a woman. However, under the huge wings of a butterfly or a moth, there was actually a giant snake that was almost the size of a light rail. Most of its colorful scales had already fallen off, and its skin that was covered in rotten sores was covered in stinky pus and blood that had already been frozen in the frost. But between the sores, there were more than a dozen lizard-like claws randomly growing. They were scattered on the snake's body without any pattern. One of them even grew out of the corner of its mouth. It was so deformed that it made people's hair stand on end. Why? Why did I? On the snake's belly, there were several skull-like scars on the snake's belly. Why can't I live? Amidst the wails, whether it was the ghost face on the moth's wings, the sinister snake head, or the human face on the scar, they were all staring at the distant Huaishur from a great distance away. They were hungry and greedy, being stared at by the big snake that was either a centipede or a moth. Even Huaishur, who had now become a giant beast, couldn't help but feel a little cold. Oh my God, this appearance is really creative. Huaishur turned back and asked Fu Yi, is it an explorer? More than that. Fu Yi poked her head out and carefully glanced into the distance. Then she saw the data that appeared on the plug-in. It says that it's a biologist who studies reptiles, and it also has the logo of the Astronomy Society. She has a GM account. Be careful. Huaishur took a breath of cold air. Even a GM account was in such a miserable state. How could others live like this? This sister obviously failed to evolve. The characteristics of several animals on her body were like a jigsaw puzzle. It was a miracle that she could still be alive and kicking, but he was afraid that she probably had no sense of reason. No, Fu Yi exclaimed. The information and data displayed here are completely messed up. Even her name can't be shown. It's hard to say whether it's her or not. If it's not her, then what is it? Huaishur was even more annoyed by her words. How would I know? Fu Yi stepped on his head and used her telekinesis to lift herself into the air. She's coming. You can go now, Iron Guru Beast. Do people still watch such an old anime like Digimon? Before Huaishur could react to what she was saying, the snake's mouth, which was full of fangs, was already biting at his neck. Even if it was dragging a pile of cumbersome wings, the deformed giant snake's speed was as fast as a train. With a terrifying speed and swollen long tail, it instantly hit Huaishur's body. In an instant, a roar erupted, and the force from the collision of the behemoths stirred up the snow in the sky. Huaishur was actually knocked back by this huge force. Then, countless scales rubbed against each other as the giant snake coiled around his body. It quickly shrunk, but unfortunately, it was futile in front of Huaishur's shell, which was more than 70% gold. Then he bit down on Huaishur's neck with his sharp, venomous teeth. Big sister, don't. Huaishur struggled with all his might and raised his two front claws. At the last moment, he managed to hold the snake's closed mouth open. The scales rubbed against each other, and a sharp roar burst out constantly. The giant snake's moth wings suddenly shook, and countless scale powder fell off. The gray scale powder mixed in the flying snow was very inconspicuous, but it suddenly made Huaishur dizzy. Deadly poison. A hissing sound suddenly burst out from beside him, and the snow in the sky suddenly danced. A wolf beast, which was exactly the same as Huaishur, walked out of the wind and snow with a roar and instantly pounced on the giant snake. The giant snake was instinctively shocked and suddenly shrank its body and quickly retreated, but then it saw the wolf-shaped behemoth suddenly disappear in the wind and snow, as if it didn't exist. Only countless snowflakes suddenly flew under the stirring of telekinesis, enveloping her and condensing into countless sharp blades, forming an effect like a washing machine, cutting her into pieces. Then, other than causing many small wounds, it was useless. Fui sighed and flew higher again. The damage was still not enough. If the telekinesis didn't hit a vital point, it was completely just a small wound for the giant beast that was getting bigger and bigger. In just a few seconds, Huaishur had recovered from the choking scale powder, and he was so angry that his eyes were green. He almost failed miserably. The angry armored wolf roared at the sky, and its 4 limbs covered in steel carapace dug 4 deep marks in the snow. Its whole body had already broken through the air, and with a terrifying weight that was almost as solid as steel, it crushed forward with a rumble. His chin, which was as sharp as a file, was raised and aimed at the giant snake's dull face. You step. Second, acceleration. The giant wolf and the giant snake crossed each other, and then, with a tragic hiss, a tragic crack appeared on the snake's back. Then, a broken moth wing detached from her bloody wound. The giant snake was furious, and countless deformed claws danced wildly. Ignoring the wound, it rushed toward Huaishur while bleeding all the way. Huaishur had already completed his turn. He turned back and used his ultimate skill, charge again. Boom! With an earth-shattering sound, the air waves whistled and swept in all directions, disturbing countless snowflakes, forming a huge wave that made people dumbfounded. At the center of the collision, Huaishur sneered, and he raised his hind claws and stepped on the middle of the giant snake, trampling her under his feet. Who are you comparing strength with, stinky brother? The giant snake raised its mouth angrily and wanted to bite Huaishur's face, but its mouth was pulled open by Huaishur's front claws. No matter how hard it struggled, it couldn't break free from Huaishur's grip. As the giant snake's neck suddenly bulged, a jet of black smoke came out of her mouth, and it just happened to spray on Huaishur's face. Not good, it's poisonous. Huaishur took a breath and felt a wave of dizziness and nausea. Then, anger rose in his heart. How can you do such an immoral thing, like vomiting everywhere? Do you think you're the only one who knows how to vomit? He took a deep breath of the fierce poison and suddenly opened the giant snake's closed mouth again. Then he aimed his head at its throat, opened his mouth, and spat out the lingering discomfort in his lungs along with the itch and nausea in his throat. Pooey. Following Huaishur's movements, a scarlet light emerged from his mouth, and the thick magma-like liquid iron phlegm was spat into the giant snake's throat. Poison? You're not joking when you say poison to my lungs that are above 800 degrees Celsius. A mouthful of thick phlegm, the effect was outstanding. The giant snake struggled miserably and hissed, but it was useless. Under Huaishur's pushing and stabbing movements, she had already firmly swallowed the mouthful of iron liquid into her stomach. Then, in the high heat that erupted from the inside out, she trembled violently and twitched. In the end, she suddenly straightened up, let out a tragic hiss, and fell to the ground. She didn't move. She was completely dead. But if she wanted to be cold, it would really take a while. Is the fruit delicious? Huaishur raised his paw disdainfully and wiped the corner of his mouth, and then saw Fu Yi's disdainful eyes. Your spitting action is so wretched. It's fine as long as it's useful. Huaishur's nose twitched, and he smelled the aroma of barbecued meat. His eyes involuntarily glanced down, and then quickly retracted. His nose couldn't help twitching again. He was hungry. Are you going to eat back what you spat out? The corner of Fu Yi's eyes twitched. The stoat felt that his worldview was about to explode. Actually, there's nothing wrong with it. I don't mind being dirty. Huaishur looked away guiltily. Fu Yi rolled her eyes and flew into the air. She didn't want to look at it all. Then, After Huaisher looked around and saw that there was no one around, he ate to his heart's content. An hour later, Huaisher and Fu Yi, who were full, went on the road again. But in the hanging basket, Fu Yi couldn't help but look back at the thing that Huaisher hooked with his tail and pulled behind him all the way. It was a section of the spine of a big snake that looked like a huge piece of wood. There were a total of 9 sections. It should be the hardest part of the big snake's body. After being covered by Huaisher's cooled metal saliva, it became a bumpy iron pillar with sharp thorns. Why are you bringing it with you? It's quite a good material. It's a pity to throw it away. Huaisher thought for a moment and said, when I rest tonight, I'll think of a way to make use of it. Fu Yi glanced at him, feeling that this guy was going to do something again. Forget it, let him be. Fu Yi suddenly felt a wave of exhaustion. Oh, Mary was killed. Above the sky not far away, the golden eagle broke through the clouds and landed in the camp. More than a dozen rat men were building a temporary camp in full swing, and several giant beasts were lowering their heads to add fire to the bonfire. Hearing him say this, the red fox sitting in the middle of the camp just nodded indifferently. After the hybrid fusion failed, it's a good thing that someone gave her a release. It seems that the difficulty of cross-species evolution is much greater than we thought. It's not something that can be solved with 2 relic transformations. The huge fox thought for a moment, looked up, and said to the golden eagle, remember to send a message to the other experimental groups and let them pay attention to the failed transformations in time. If they are parasitized by the things that were bred in the night of the witch, I'm afraid they will become something terrible. The golden eagle nodded and said yes. The edge of the fog country is already so dangerous. Do we have to go deeper? The snow leopard, who looked like it was carved out of crystal, asked, I feel that the illusion forest is too dangerous. Why don't we go underground? I heard that the ecology there is different from ours. Maybe there will be some new discoveries. The fox suggested. That's fine. Several beasts nodded. The progress of everyone's project has been paused for so long. It's time to leave. Then, before we leave, let's finish the previous evolutionary conjecture project. Whose turn is it this time? I'll do it myself. The fox sighed. It's a pity that I couldn't get the young man named Huaisher to come over. He has quite a lot of potential. Hey, tricking people to be test subjects is very disgraceful. A rat man looked up and said, he's a military officer. When he comes back to London to beat you up, no one will help you. Forget it. The fox shivered and shook its head quickly. But why didn't Dr. Plum say hello to me? The golden eagle raised its claws and scratched its chin. Did I offend her? The snow leopard suddenly said, by the way, isn't she going to marry Cartel recently? Why is she with a young military officer? Several giant beasts looked at each other, and then the atmosphere fell into a strange silence. Everyone's eyes suddenly became filled with pity. It was as if they saw the green light lingering above their colleagues' heads. This is probably love. The passing rat man shook his head and sighed with the vicissitudes of the past. Chapter 3:31. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. It seemed to be never-ending. Huaisher finally knew where the water vapor evaporated from the terrible drought a few days ago went. But with this never-ending snowstorm, the temperature became colder and colder. In the end, the thin layer of fur on Fu Yi's body was no longer useful. Left with no other choice, Huaisher caught a few roe deers, skinned them, and tanned them crudely with a molten iron that she was especially good at. Fu Yi quickly used her psychokinesis and spikes to sew a few crooked leather jackets for herself and put them on. Like a ball. Huaisher didn't dare to say this sentence out loud. The temperature was getting lower and lower, and the snow was getting heavier and heavier. It seemed to be never-ending, and everything was white. They walked forward against the blizzard for 2 days, tirelessly. The main reason was that Huaisher didn't know fatigue. Anyway, his teeth were so good that he could eat anything. When he was thirsty, he drank water. When he was hungry, he hunted. If he couldn't hunt, he might as well eat soil. And the terrifying body temperature completely resisted the cold outside. His mobility wasn't affected much at all. Just like this, They walked forward for 2 days. However, when he looked forward and backward, all he could see through the dense snowflakes was a vast snowfield. It was lonely, as if they were abandoned by the world. When the sky darkened, Huaishur rammed the snake's spine, iron stake pulled by his tail, into the ground. After piling some trees nearby, he skillfully spat on them, and a raging fire burned vigorously. Light heating equals fire. Fire plus song equals me. If I add you to the song, the temperature will increase even more. Singing a bunch of old songs, Huaishur dug a deep hole and piled some snow into it. She spat out some phlegm and boiled some hot water. After a tiring day, she began to soak her feet and rest. Well, it was hard to say whether it was useful to soak his feet in this body now. Fu used her spikes to pick up the meat stored in her bound space. She repeatedly roasted the frozen meat over the fire and couldn't help but sigh. I want to drink a bowl of hot soup. Yes, I want to sleep on a big, soft bed. Huaishur also soaked her tail in the water, stirred it twice with satisfaction, and let out a long sigh. I still want to play games. Uncle Fong's supper will be ready by the time I finish the game. After supper, I'll continue to play games. After playing games, I can sleep. Fu sighed listlessly. I just want to eat some barbecued meat. Then hurry up and sleep. Huaishur shook his head. You can have everything in your dreams, or you could just press the safe exit button. Your parents will definitely satisfy you then. You're just thinking of ways to not bring me along, right? Fu rolled her eyes. You're so annoying. Huaishur didn't say anything. He seemed to have fallen asleep in the hot water. This guy, wasn't he afraid of catching a cold? Was he really possessed by a husky? No. According to Fu Yi's conjecture these days, it wasn't that she would become whatever she became, but that she would become whatever she originally looked like. So, was she a hedgehog? And Huaishur was a husky? To a certain extent, it was quite appropriate. Fu Yi sighed. She turned around and was about to tell him to be careful. He didn't want to be frozen in the hole he dug after sleeping for a while like yesterday. But when she turned around, she froze in place. Behind her, there was no hot pool, nor was there any sign of the giant beast. Huaishur was gone. She was stunned for a long time, but soon reacted. She fully activated her psychokinesis and radiated it in all directions. Then, she looked down at her map plug-in. Huaishur, where did you go? No one responded. Huaishur, she shouted and looked around, but when she turned around again, the fire behind her had disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never been there. In the dead silence, only the wind and snow danced in the sky. But the violent wind seemed to gradually slow down. As countless snowflakes rustled down, the scene dozens of steps away finally revealed. A wooden house suddenly appeared in front of her. Soft light shone from the small wooden house, and smoke with a strong fragrance slowly rose from the chimney. A warm breath was close at hand. Fu Yi was stunned. Amidst the silence, the door was slowly pushed open with a creak. An elderly woman wearing an apron and looking at Fu Yi with a gentle and genial expression appeared on her face. She had a slightly plump figure, a kind face, and 6 long whiskers hanging down from her mouth. She looked like a chubby old cat. Is it another lost child? She smiled and waved at Fu Yi. Come in and warm yourself up. I just made soup. Fu Yi was silent for a moment and shook her head. The stoat's psychokinesis suddenly trembled, carrying her into the sky and flying into the distance. Only a crazy person would go to such a place where they knew there was a ghost, right? But when she landed on the ground, exhausted, she looked back and saw the warm wooden house that didn't seem to have moved at all, and the old woman standing quietly at the door, waiting in the wind and snow. Come in, child. She smiled. I made hot soup. Fu Yi fled in panic. But the warm light chased after her from beginning to end, like a maggot in a tarsal bone, slowly approaching. In the end, Fu Yi had no strength to run anymore. She fell in the snow. When she looked back, she saw the old woman on the steps, smiling gently. The cat kitchen girl suggested again. The stew is ready just now. If you don't mind, how about eating together? In the long silence, Fu Yi closed her eyes, moved her consciousness away from the red safe exit icon for the last time, and opened her eyes. She said, "Okay." Huaisher felt that he was lost in the blizzard. Suddenly, the sky and earth turned, and Fu Yi disappeared. He was thrown into a deep pit, and it was difficult for him to jump out of the hundreds of meters high cliff. When he looked back, he smelled the stench from the depths of the darkness. Muffled footsteps could be heard. It was accompanied by the low growls of the beasts. Soon, two behemoths walked out of the open crack. Their amber vertical pupils looked at Huaisher with natural ferocity. They opened their mouths, and hot iron liquid dripped from the corners of their mouths. Huaisher was stunned for a long time. He suspected that he was looking at a mirror, because the two behemoths looked exactly the same as him. There was no difference. Tisk, Huaisher narrowed his eyes, looked at them, and suddenly asked, "Are you going to say that everything from your body to your personality is exactly the same as mine?" "Exactly." The two mirror-like behemoths responded. Their voices overlapped, but if one listened carefully, it didn't sound like one or two voices, but more like dozens of voices overlapped. "That's great." Huaisher grinned, moved his body, and asked in a low voice, "That is to say, you know what I'm thinking now." So, the two wolf beasts showed a strange smile. The wind and snow came suddenly. It covered everything. In the wooden house, the fire in the fireplace burned fiercely. The stew hanging above the fire made a boiling sound, and a sweet smell of meat rose. With the stirring of the spoon, it spread to the surroundings. Fu Yi sat at the cozy dining table and looked around. Oil lamp, table, chairs, and cutlery. Everything seemed to be built according to her taste and taste. She liked it from the bottom of her heart. Even if she knew it was strange, she didn't want to blame this cute outfit. There was only a faint sound that kept ringing out, as if someone was whispering something. The oil lamp said, "She's looking at me. My arm is itchy. Can I scratch it?" "Don't move. You're the oil lamp." The table reprimanded in a low voice. "Can't you hold on a little longer? What if you expose yourself?" "Shut up." The tapestry interrupted their whispers. "She seems to have heard us." "Yes, don't talk." The vase interrupted, showing her presence. The oil lamp was angry. "Then what are you doing, farting?" "Enough." The cupboard jumped angrily. "Shut up, all of you, don't talk." "She's looking at us." The whispers died away. Soon, steaming hot stew, roasted steak that was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, and even fragrant, delicious, sour, spicy, and appetizing sauces were placed in front of Fu Yi along with a huge wooden plate. "Please eat, child." The cat chef raised her meaty paw and touched the stoat's head. "Don't be shy. You must be hungry, right?" "I'm hungry, yes." Fu Yi looked around and compared it with the emergency rescue handbook from hell that her father forced her to memorize when she was young. She had already seen through the surface. But isn't all of this fake? She picked up the fork roughly and stabbed a piece of meat. She raised it, activated her psychokinesis, and tore it. The piece of stew dripping with gravy disappeared like bubbles. "Are you treating me to a meal? Or am I treating you to a meal?" Fu Yi looked at the cat chef coldly. "My friends and I to you are just food, right?" The cat chef looked at her blankly for a long time. She sighed helplessly, pulled out a chair, and sat opposite her. After serving herself a bowl of stew, she looked up and asked, "Do you mind if I talk while eating? Do I have the power to resist?" Fu Yi asked indifferently. She didn't pounce on him like he had expected. Instead, she picked up her fork and tasted her stew. She was graceful, and her movements were gentle. "Relax, child. No one here wants to eat you." The cat chef looked up at the nervous stoat. "Do you think we are the kind of barbaric creatures that will eat living things? Then why did you catch me and bring me here? You broke in, didn't you?" The cat chef smiled helplessly. "And we just want to save you." Chapter 332. Fu Yi felt like she had just heard a joke. But this joke was not funny at all. She was caught and brought here just to save herself. Nothing could be more comical than such words. Have you ever thought about it, child? When the delicious meal was over, the cat chef wiped the corner of her mouth and spread her paws on the table. She asked solemnly, "Thinking makes one wise, but thinking also makes one painful. But if you don't think, you can only fall into ignorance forever, becoming a monster without knowing it. Fu-Yi frowned. Won't you be if you think about it? After thinking about it, you will know that you have become a monster, just like us. The cat chef shook her head as if she was mocking herself. The more you think, the more fearful you are. Fearful of our future, fearful of the coming of the end. She said, fearful of death. When the destined destruction comes, what choice will you make? Will you seek survival at all costs? Or will you give up all struggle and beg for mercy from the heavens? Or will you resist without knowing your own strength? Around the cat chef, there seemed to be countless voices overlapping as they asked solemnly, have you ever thought about the future, child? Your future. In this dark world, is there any light in your future? Will you welcome death one day in the future? We have thought about it. The cat chef said. Then we came to a conclusion. Finally, we came here. Now, we are here to welcome you. She said, it is that simple. Fu-Yi shook her head. To be honest, I don't see any connection between your conclusion and the illusion in front of me. This is the answer and result we have thought about. The cat chef knocked on the table. Then, the snowstorm outside the window suddenly stopped. Then, the sun shone brightly, and countless exotic flowers and plants grew from the fertile land. Colorful phantoms kept flashing outside the window and inside the house. From time to time, there were curious eyes peeking inside. They seemed to be young men, young girls, old people, or none of them. Thousands of cats squatted on the trees, on the ground, on the beams, on the tables, on the chairs, and even next to Fu-Yi. They poked their heads out and looked carefully at the outsiders. They called out to her in a friendly manner, and some of them even went up to her and rubbed against her, wanting to play with her. Fu-Yi floated up in a fluster and isolated the cats. She turned around and looked at the cat chef. These are all illusions, right? That's right. All the cats spoke in unison. What you see are the actions and results of our species' efforts to deal with the apocalypse, the shelter within the void. Since death is unstoppable, we can postpone it indefinitely until the future that is destined to usher in extinction. We could be redeemed and rested in an eternity of time. And now, what we want to do is to share this peace with you. Outsiders, don't be attached to the outside world that is destined to sink into destruction. Why don't you stay here? Stay in this fantasy land that can satisfy all your desires. Fu-Yi fell silent. She could instinctively feel the sincerity in their words, and she could also feel the fear of Doomsday that was inherited in her body's bloodline. This world was about to be destroyed. There was no doubt about it. If they didn't hide it from him, then it was indeed their good intentions to pull him and Lin Sanjiu into it. In this cruel world, what could be more precious than the happiness and peace before death? After a long silence, she suddenly asked, what if I refuse? A white cat said, then it means you haven't understood. The black cat said, maybe you just haven't understood. The tabby cat tilted its head. What's wrong with being here? You have to eat and sleep outside. We said, you have to endure hunger and pain, but there is no sorrow or despair here. The Persian cat looked up. There is no difference between reality and illusion. The apocalypse will never come. The calf of the tabby cat passed by her and looked up at her. Before the apocalypse, we can all die in happiness and peace. You're just obsessed with the outside world. The cat chef, who was as kind as a grandmother, picked up the calf and put it in her arms. Want to make a bet? What bet? Let's prove to you that the outside world is no different from the inside of the sanctuary. The cat chef said, there is everything here. No matter what kind of life you want to live or what kind of things you want to have, you can get them. We will prove this to you. How? Fu-Yi frowned. Make a wish, child. All the cats said in unison. We can fulfill your wish, any wish. You have 3 chances to ask us for what you want. If there is anything you know and have that we can't achieve or obtain, then the sanctuary's existence is unnecessary to you. If you can't get the happiness and peace you want here, you can take your friends and leave. They paused for a moment. Then, the cat chef said seriously, but if you can't find anything here that could satisfy you, please stay here. Let's be friends. We will get along very well. Fu, he didn't say anything. She didn't know how to respond. It was true that this was an illusion, but the illusion was too real. Even time seemed to be able to accelerate, and she could realize any dream and desire. She did have a way to leave, but it was equivalent to leaving Huaishir here alone. If she still wanted to continue exploring in the Night of the Witch, then she had to win this bet. Otherwise, she could only stay here and dream for the rest of the time. To be honest, she didn't think there was anything wrong with dreaming. Being friends with a group of cats also seemed interesting. But as expected, she still felt that it was more interesting to go on an adventure with Huaishir. Therefore, she had to win. Then, what did she have in the outside world that she couldn't get here? Even if she didn't know the details of the Ascended and Hell, she knew that at this time, she couldn't ask for anything material. Material was the most demanding thing, but in the illusion, material became the simplest thing. Maybe she could try to lie, but was there really no way for them to know what she was thinking? She thought for a long time and suddenly made her first wish. I want to be free. All the cats stared at her silently, unmoved. Only the grandmother cat chef looked at her with pity, as if she already knew what she was thinking, and asked softly, "That kind of thing, when you were outside, did you have it?" Fu, he was silent. Did she have it? She didn't know. Whether it was her father's steel cradle or her mother's control and planning of her life. In between, how much of it belonged to Fu Yi? She didn't answer. She didn't have such a luxury outside the dream of the Night of the Witch. After a long time, she lowered her head dejectedly and sighed deeply. Then, she made her second wish. Friends. She looked up and said, I don't have any friends here. Actually, your friend is here too. The cat chef said gently, Do you want to see him? Fu Yi smiled as if she understood something. I thought you would say that you were my friends too. Friendship is mutual, isn't it? The cat chef said warmly, We do want to be friends with you, but I'm afraid that you can't trust us at this moment, right? Fu Yi let out a long sigh. A big stone was lifted from her heart. Huaishir was still here. At least he didn't run away or get kidnapped by something. In fact, Fu Yi suspected that as long as these cats pretended to be her, and with a little guidance, Huaishir would jump into the trap with the bone in his mouth. I'll say in advance, this is not my last wish. Fu Yi raised her hand and asked, Can I see him? Of course. The cat chef nodded, and then showed a somewhat awkward expression. But he seems to be busy. I'm afraid he can't take care of you for a while. I'm not lying. You'll know when you see him. She waved her hand and pushed open the window. There was no snowstorm outside the window. The cats on the trees and in the grass disappeared silently, replaced by a familiar scene of ice and snow. In the deep pit, 3 huge wolf beasts were fighting fiercely and had reached the most dangerous moment. Roars came one after another. Pair 7. Pair 9. Can't afford it. Bomb. My king bomb. As he threw the iron card on the ground, Huaishir jumped up from the ground and laughed proudly. I won again. F***CK, what luck. Are you F***King cheating? The other 2 wolf beasts, whose faces were covered with tin-foil strips, looked at Huaishir suspiciously, but couldn't find any evidence against him. If you don't catch me, then it's not cheating. Huaishir whistled and rubbed the long piece of tin-foil out again. He spat on it and threw it on the faces of the 2 wolf beasts, sighing, You guys are still too young. Huaishir's card skills could only be said to be average. However, he used to play poker with Crow in the basement when he was free after training. After such a long time, his card skills hadn't improved at all, but his experience and ability to cheat were getting better and better day by day. Even if the 2 wolf beasts copied Huaishir's personality, physical fitness, and even short-term memory, how could they copy the experience and instincts that he gained from cheating Crow? Continue. There's still one more round. Huaishir took the lead to shuffle the cards. You can't go back on your words. If I win this round, you have to let me and my brother go. Hurry up. Let's play a few more rounds. Anyway, aren't you quite free? The 2 brothers happily shuffled the cards, and someone suggested, Hey, do you want some supper? You must be hungry. We have some crispy meat and edamame here they can go with wine. In the dead silence, Fu Yi stared at the scene outside the window in disbelief. You're really something. Why, sure. I tried my best to save you. How did you reach an agreement with the criminals so quickly? Cat Chef smiled and looked at the scene outside the window, then turned back to look at Fu. Maybe you can wait for a while and watch them play Fight the Landlord. Forget it. Fu Yi sighed sadly. Won't it be too embarrassing to win by playing Fight the Landlord? Cat Chef smiled, closed the window, and asked solemnly. Then, have you thought of your last wish? Fu Yi nodded. Chapter 333. In the silence, the Cat Chef quietly studied the girl in front of her. After a long time, she took off the round-framed glasses on her face, seemingly helpless. Have you really thought it through, child? She said, the so-called gamble is just to let you know and understand that there is no difference between here and the outside world. Is there really something in the outside world that is so full of disasters that you are reluctant to part with? Yes. Fu Yi nodded resolutely. The Cat Chef asked again, even if you have to bet the possibility of staying here forever, you still want to leave at all costs? Yes. The girl nodded again. It's so sad. You remind me of many of our companions and clansmen. The old cat grandmother sighed and stroked the kitten in her hand. They're all like you. They did not hesitate to break with us just to run to hell, to seek death. It's too unbelievable. Life is precious. It shouldn't be like this. I understand. Fu Yi said. Even so, you still want to go? Yes. Even if you have no chance of winning at all? No. This is the only thing I won't agree with. Fu Yi smiled happily. I will definitely win this gamble. All the cats fell into silence. They solemnly studied the girl in front of them, waiting for her request. Please, child, the Cat Chef said, tell us your last wish. Then, please tell me. Fu Yi took a deep breath and asked solemnly, can I get love here? No one responded. All the cats were silent. They looked at her quietly, or at each other in astonishment. Finally, their gazes fell on the old grandmother. The grandmother was silent. Fu Yi's smile became more and more cheerful. What I want is what I have in the outside world. And you can't give it to me, right? The grandmother did not refute. Fu Yi asked again, like friendship, love is also mutual, right? Yes. The grandmother nodded. Fu Yi was relieved. She took a deep breath and asked the last question. So you can't give it to me, right? The grandmother pondered for a moment and suddenly said, you can try. As if in a trance, Huaisher couldn't help but yawn in the midst of the intense card battle. He was sleepy. Like an illusion, he heard a familiar and sweet voice beside him. Huaisher, I like you. Brother, stop messing around. Subconsciously, he pushed to the side, but he pushed empty air. He was stunned for a moment. Amazing. He actually heard his good brother confess to him. Where did this adolescent hallucination come from? What happened? The wolf beast at the side urged, hurry up and fight. I've been waiting for so long that even the flowers have withered. Ha 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 ha, what are you ha? Huaisher swung his hand and threw the 2 kings onto the pile of cards. What do you have that's bigger than me? I won. You guys are going to lose, even your underwear to me. Okay? The 2 single dogs, whose faces were covered in foil, cursed and threw their bad cards on the ground. He had lost completely. In the room, in the awkward silence, the old woman hesitated and said, I can guide him. Love always needs some time to develop, right? But this isn't from you guys, right? Fu Yi smiled. Love is mutual, but it's different from friendship. There can't be a third person in it. The old Cat Chef couldn't help but lower her head and sigh dejectedly. Then, she heard a voice outside the door. She won. As if waiting outside the door for a long time, the old man who stopped here made his final judgment and left with weak footsteps. The Cat Chef nodded. Although it was a pity, she still accepted the loss of the bet and lowered her head to comfort the sad kitten in her arms. Fu Yi's tense body finally relaxed, and she let out a long breath. Immediately, she was puzzled. Why didn't you lie to me? Huh? The old chef didn't understand. I mean, this kind of rule is completely free of choice, right? Fu Yi said, love is an illusory thing. As long as we twist our rules a little, It's easy to realize. Isn't it easy to create a fake person? The cat chef smiled bitterly and shook her head. If that's the case, wouldn't we be lying to you? Fu Yi was stunned. We just want you to stay here and be friends with us, she said seriously. Before the destruction comes, everyone can be happy together. There will be no betrayal, no harm, and no suspicion of each other. After all, this is a shelter, not a prison, isn't it? She smiled kindly and raised her furry hand to touch the stoat's little ears. Child, lying can't be exchanged for sincerity or friendship. The old chef reminded her seriously, you can't hide it either. Fu Yi was stunned. She looked away a little evasively. I know, she whispered. I just need some time, then wait patiently. The old chef finally smiled gently. Before the end comes, we all have enough time to wait and love. Her figure slowly dissipated, along with many disappointed cats. The warm light of the wooden hut slowly extinguished, as if it had sunk into the distant darkness and left her. Fu Yi returned to the cold snow, but the snowstorm had stopped. The sky was clear and the air was fresh. On the table in front of her, there was a steaming pot of stew and 2 bowls and chopsticks. A white crystal was pressed on a note. On the note, there was a drawing of a smiling face that resembled an old grandmother and a line of handwriting. Before the end of the wait, please share it with your friends. Fu Yi was stunned for a long time. She couldn't help but sniff the warm stew in front of her. She couldn't help but laugh. What? You're still so gentle to us in the end? She was silent for a long time. She turned back and looked at a certain husky lying in the snow, drooling. Her expression became angry and helpless. A snowball the size of a football hit his face. Huaisher was startled and looked around vigilantly. What? What's wrong? Where's the enemy? Fu Yi, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Thinking of this guy reaching a consensus with the enemy, Fu Yi couldn't help but get angry. Protect my ass. What are you waiting for? Come and eat. Why is there food? It smells so good. Why do you care so much? Just eat. Don't use your mouth, okay? It's gonna fall over. Forget it. I'll scoop it for you. The stoat sighed and waved his hand, activating his telekinesis. While he was at it, he quietly hid the note in his space. Wait. Her mood became heavy again. She wouldn't be able to wait with this guy until the end of the world, right? Forget it. Let's eat first. She picked up a small bowl and took a bite of the fresh and juicy beef. She narrowed her eyes in satisfaction. Delicious. There was a disappointing voice next to her. The meal was finished quickly. After all, the bowl was so big that it wasn't enough to fill the gaps between Huaisher's teeth, but the taste was really good. The steaming hot food warmed her heart after eating. Then, Huaisher finally noticed the white crystal in Fu Yi's hand. Where did you get it? He leaned over and widened his eyes. It's shiny and beautiful. He wanted to eat it. He had gotten used to eating it these days. Go away. Someone gave it to me. Why are you licking it? Fu Yi took the crystal away, not letting Huaisher continue licking it. But for some reason, with the crystal in her hand, she felt her heart beat faster. Her breathing was rapid. Very quickly, the white crystal actually emitted a faint light and fused into her body. Wow, you're eating it yourself and not giving me a bite? Huaisher was surprised. Then he saw Fu Yi stagger back as if drunk and sit on the ground dizzily. I seem a little, she said, sleepy. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Immediately after, the layer of fine white fur on her body began to grow crazily, wrapping around her and turning her into something like a cocoon. Huaisher rubbed his nose in astonishment. He was hesitating whether to burn this thing with a mouthful of molten iron and save Fu Yi. But when he thought about it, there was no F***king function to block friendly fire. What if he accidentally burned Fu Yi to death? After he went out, he would be eagerly entertained by the good brothers of the Social Security Bureau with thermite, flamethrowers, and napalm bombs. Just as he was hesitating, the cocoon had already fallen apart. Fu Yi, who seemed to have been reborn, opened her eyes. When she saw Huaisher open his mouth, she subconsciously raised her hand and sealed his mouth. If he said something like, "You're shedding fur," or "You're bald," Fu Yi wouldn't be able to take it. Her teeth closed with a crunch. Fu, he was scared. Huaishi's mouth was really sealed by her psychokinesis. It was like an iron clamp, unable to open it. It wasn't until she reacted and released the clamp that Huaishi was stunned. Why did you become transparent? At this moment, Fu Yi noticed that her body seemed to have really become a little transparent. It seemed that the transparency of the Photoshop layer was wrong and pulled up a little, so she could actually vaguely see the color of the soil behind her body. Other than this, Huaishi asked curiously, "What else can it be?" "Let me see." Fu Yi opened the plug-in and hurriedly searched. Soon, Fu Yi's voice sounded in Huaishi's mind. "Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?" "Wow, I can't move in human form." Huaishi sighed. "You don't even have to pay the phone bill. You can shut up." Encountering such a killjoy, he could make all the good stuff seem worthless. "Other than this, is there anything else?" Huaishi asked. "No, what else do you want?" Fu Yi turned around and rolled her eyes at him. "It's good enough that there's something." "Okay." Huaishi lost the opportunity to see something strange and shook his head resentfully. "Then let's go." "Okay, let's go." Fu Yi jumped up and skillfully flew to his back. "Attack, Huaishi, attack." For some reason, Huaishi suddenly felt that Fu Yi was quite cute just now. It must be an illusion. His good brother was so ruthless, he must be thinking too much. So, Huaishi grinned and ran forward with his tongue hanging out. On his back, Fu Yi couldn't help but sigh. She took one last look at the interface and looked away. This was the only new skill that Huaishi didn't tell her. Psychological suggestion. It didn't seem to work at all. She sighed, weakly fell on her back, and fell asleep. Behind them, in the depths of the forest, an illusory wooden house faintly appeared from the air. It quietly watched them go away. "Go to the king's city, outsiders. The things you desire are all there." The cat chef whispered goodbye. "I hope that after you leave this short dream, you can face this cruel world." That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.